In a seemingly perfect marriage, Eric Anderson returns home early only to find his life shattered by a mysterious attack. As he lies in a hospital bed, memories flood back. His wife, Nikki, whispers urgently to a man named John. Suspicion grows when Eric discovers 2 hidden airline vouchers, hinting at a secret rendezvous. Tony, the detective, reveals chilling details. The shooter wanted Eric to suffer. Could Nikki be involved? As Eric confronts her, the truth becomes a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. In a final confrontation, Eric must face the possibility that his wife's loyalty is not what it seems. Will he uncover the truth before it's too late? I felt really happy as I packed my things and went upstairs. I had just completed a big project in Dallas a day earlier than expected, which allowed me to come home sooner than I planned. I thought about what I would do with Nikki that evening. As I reached the landing and took my last steps, I turned around and saw a man standing at the top of the stairs. My eyes were drawn to the gun in his hand. I stared at it for a moment before I saw a flash. Suddenly, I felt myself falling backward down the stairs. Then everything went black. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I soon found myself in bed, in a strange room. It hit me that this was not my bed, and I didn't know where I was. The room was dark, but I could hear someone whispering nearby. I tried to move, but couldn't. I managed to turn my head a little. My thoughts began to wander until I recognized Nikki's voice. She was by the door, talking to a man I couldn't see clearly because he was facing away from me. They didn't notice I was awake, so I listened closely to their conversation. "What did the doctor say?" the man asked. "He said Eric is getting better, but he's still at risk," Nikki responded. She was talking about me. What did she mean by still at risk? I tried to understand, but my thoughts were jumbled. It sounded like Nikki was holding the man's hand and urging him to leave. "John, you shouldn't be here," she said. "Does he remember what happened?" "I don't know. Detective Trenchard asked him yesterday, but Eric was too out of it to answer," Nikki replied. "I want to know what he tells the police as soon as he can talk." "Please leave before he wakes up and sees you," she urged. "Okay, I'll go. But remember what I said. I just can't stay with you right now," said the man. I was trying to understand what they were discussing. She called him John, but I didn't know who he was. Nikki looked in my direction, and I quickly shut my eyes. When I opened them again, the man was gone, and Nikki was sitting in a chair by the dark window. I wondered if the man had really been there or if I had imagined it. I wanted to ask Nikki where I was and who he was, but I couldn't open my eyes. I decided to rest for a moment and then ask Nikki to tell me where I was. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning, and I was staring up at the white ceiling. The room was quiet, but I could feel that there were other people nearby. I turned my head to the right as much as I could, but it wasn't very far. Maybe it was only 3 or 4 inches wide, but it was enough for me to see Nikki sitting by the window. The sunlight shone brightly behind her, so I couldn't see her lovely face, but I could see her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. She was holding a tissue in her hand. Nikki turned away from me and looked out the window. She didn't seem to realize I was awake. I tried turning my head to the left, but that didn't help much either. Instead, I could see the annoying guy who kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. I wasn't sure if he was someone I knew from my past or just a dream. He was about 5'7" and weighed around 165 pounds. His curly brown hair almost matched the color of his old suit. This suit looked like it had been worn every day for 5 years. The elbows were worn out, the pockets were frayed, and his big blue tie was so out of style that it really clashed with his suit. The strange part was I recognized him right away, but I couldn't remember who he was. I had a foggy memory of him asking me questions, but I couldn't recall what they were or why he was asking. When I saw him, the name Curly popped into my head, but I wasn't sure if that was his name or just something I thought because of his hair. Anyway, Curly was leaning against the wall reading a newspaper. When he lowered the paper and looked over it, I quickly shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I was not in the mood to answer questions. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the room was empty. Nikki and Curly were gone, and it was dark outside. I must have slept for a long time, and I felt sad about that. I really wanted to talk to Nikki. I remembered I wanted to ask her something, but I couldn't recall what it was. I lay still and listened, trying to understand what was happening. My thoughts started to clear a little. I realized I was in a hospital, but I had no idea how long I had been there or why I was there. I remembered seeing Nicky by the window a couple of times and that Curly had asked me questions at least once, as I had seen him leaning against the wall several times. It was hard to tell if all of this happened in one day or over several days. What troubled me most was not knowing how long I had been in the hospital or the reason for it all. The quiet room helped me think. I tried to remember my last clear memory. As I lay still, letting my mind rewind, a memory suddenly came back to me. I remembered coming home from a project in Dallas, carrying my bags. I think I set the bags down in the hallway, but then what? I couldn't remember what I did next. Did I go to the kitchen? Did I head to the bathroom? That must have been it. I thought I was in a rush to get home, so I must have really needed to use the bathroom. I wasn't sure if that was right, but it made sense. Anyway, I remember picking up my bags and starting up the stairs. I turned right at the landing to go to the second floor. I saw someone standing at the top of the stairs. Now I remembered it was a big guy with dark brown hair, but I couldn't see his face because my eyes were looking off to the side. I was looking at the gun he was pointing at me. It felt like it lasted a long time, but it was really only a few seconds. Then I saw a flash. I was already falling backward down the stairs when I heard a loud bang from the gun going off. After that, I only remembered bits and pieces of what happened. I vaguely remember waking up in the hospital, Nicky holding my hand and crying, but it could have been a dream. I wasn't sure of anything. The next time I saw Nicky, she didn't look well. She was very pale and her eyes were red and swollen. She came over to the bed, took my hand, and kissed my forehead. "Nicky, are you okay?" I asked. "You don't look okay." I was surprised at how my voice sounded. It was weak and hoarse. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I was so scared I might lose you. The doctor just told me you are out of danger and should recover fully." "How long have I been here?" I asked. "Since Friday," she said. "I know since Friday, but what day is it today?" "Tuesday," Nicky replied. "I've lost 3 days," I said. "How are you feeling today?" asked Nicky. "I don't. I feel almost nothing right now. My head is clear and I hope it stays that way. Until now I've felt lost," I said. "What happened to me?" "You don't remember?" Nicky asked. "Only a little bit," I said. Nicky started to say something, but a man's voice interrupted her. "Why don't you let me explain things to Mr. Anderson?" the voice said. I saw that it was a man with curly hair. He came into the room just as I asked Nicky what was wrong and sat down next to her. It seemed to me that he was still wearing the same brown suit. "Who are you?" I asked. "You don't remember?" he said. "I remember you asking me questions, but I don't remember your name or what you asked," I said. "I'm Detective Tony Trenchard. I'm in charge of this case," he said. "What exactly is this case?" I asked. "Here's what we know so far," Detective Trenchard said. "You returned home from Dallas on Friday around noon. When you got to your home, it looks like you were faced with a burglary. We still don't know how many people were involved, but you were going up the stairs with your luggage when a man at the top shot you. You were shot 3 times in your chest and stomach. Mrs. Anderson arrived home at around 12:25 p.m. and found you lying at the bottom of the stairs. She called 911 right away. It seems that the burglar or burglars ran away right after you were shot. They might have been worried that someone heard the gunfire. You were very fortunate in 2 ways. First, the person who attacked you used a small .32 caliber gun. This type of gun isn't as harmful as a larger one, like a .38 or a 9mm. The second piece of good luck was that your wife came home for dinner. If she hadn't found you and called for help, you could have bled a lot and could have died quickly. I held Nicky's hand and smiled at her. What do you say to your wife when she has saved your life? A simple thank you didn't feel like enough. I turned to the detective. Do you know who might have done this? I asked. He said there have been several break-ins in the Sherman Oaks area lately. The thieves often break into homes during the day when the owners are at work. This was the first time this happened. We hope that in their rush after the shooting, they might have made a mistake and left behind some clues to help catch them. I believe you were shot because you saw at least one of them and they thought you were dead. Otherwise, they probably would have made sure you were. Detective Branca asked me again what I remembered about Friday. I told him that the only thing I could recall was carrying my bags upstairs. When I turned around at the top of the stairs, I saw someone there. I described the person as big with dark brown hair, but I couldn't see his face because I was focused on the gun. After the first shot, everything went blank for me. Detective Franco said I probably saw his face, but seeing the gun frightened me, so that's all I remember. But over time, I think you'll remember what he looked like and will be able to tell us more. I hope so, I replied. Detective Trenchard then said he would leave us alone and check in tomorrow to see if I remembered anything else. I looked at Nikki and thanked her for saving my life. She started to cry and kissed my face. "Eric, I don't know what I would do if I lost you," she said. Then a terrible thought hit me. My stomach twisted, and I felt a lump in my throat. Nikki noticed the tears on my cheeks and asked, "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" "Yeah, but it's not an ache in my body," I said. "It just hit me that if I hadn't come home when I did, you might have walked in and been in danger. Now I don't feel so bad about being hurt. I may have saved you without even knowing it." We hugged, and I think we both cried for a little while. After a while, I started to feel some pain from my injuries. Nikki called for a nurse, and she came and gave me something to ease the pain. I fell asleep for a few hours, and when I woke up, Nikki was sitting by the window reading a book. As soon as she saw me awake, she came to my bed and kissed me gently. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything for the pain?" she asked. "No, I'm okay right now," I replied before drifting back to sleep. I was going to ask her what had happened. "What do you mean, what was taken away? What did those people take from our house?" I asked. "What did we lose?" "I don't know," Nikki said. "They made a mess in the family room, but I don't know what's broken or missing yet. I haven't looked closely," she added. "Why didn't you check to see what was stolen?" I asked. I wasn't mad. I was just curious. "I haven't been back to the house since it happened. The police were there the whole time and I couldn't stay. Seeing my own blood on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, I just couldn't do it. I've been staying with my parents ever since." "I'm sorry about that," I said. "I understand why you don't want to be there right now. I guess we'll need to hire someone to help clean up." "We can't do anything until the police say it's okay. They say it's a crime scene. We have to wait until they finish their work before we can clean. There's no rush. We can stay with my parents until it's done." The rest of the time, Nikki stayed with me. We talked about everything but what happened on Friday. Later that night, after Nikki left, I thought about how close I was to losing everything, and how close I was to losing her. It felt like I could have lost her forever. I tried to remember anything important about the shooting and recalled something else that seemed important. I wasn't sure if I remembered it right, but every time I tried to picture the shooter, the same thought returned. I hoped Detective Franco would come by the next day so I could share it with him. A nurse came in a little later, added something to my IV, and soon I fell asleep. The next morning, I felt much better. I still couldn't move around in bed and wondered why my injuries were worse than I thought. At 8 o'clock, Nikki came into the room. She kissed me and said, "I love you, Eric." "I love you too," I said. "I can't stay with you today," Nikki said. "School opens in 2 weeks and I have to go to meetings and get my class ready. I'll stay until the doctor visits, but then I have to leave. I'll be back around 4 o'clock. "That's okay," I said. "I'll be fine. I might take a nap while you're gone." Nikki laughed. "A nap? You mean your breaks between sleep and naps?" "Yeah, all those naps make me tired," I joked. I started to laugh, but it hurt my chest. When Nikki saw the pained look on my face, she began to cry. "It's okay, Nikki. It just hurts when I laugh. So don't try to be funny," I said. Nikki tried to smile, but the tears kept flowing down her cheeks. She was just taking a tissue from her purse when the doctor came in. "How are you today, Mr. Anderson?" the doctor asked. "I'm not sure," I answered. "I think I'm okay, given everything." "I'm sorry. I know you have told me your name, but I don't remember it," I said. "No problem at all," he replied. "I'm Dr. Berger." "Dr. Berger," I repeated. "Can you tell me why I can't move my arms or legs and why I can only turn my head a little?" I asked. "We had to keep you still to help you heal after the surgery," he explained. "How serious are my injuries?" I wanted to know. "Serious, but you are safe now. You're very lucky," Dr. Berger said. I remembered that Detective Trenchard had told me I might not be here if I had been shot with a bigger gun. I felt sorry I had said that because I saw Nikki's face go pale. "That's true," the doctor acknowledged. "But you were even luckier because the bullets didn't hit your liver or kidneys. They didn't cause much harm." "How long will Eric have to be in the hospital?" Nikki asked. I hope he'll be out of bed by this afternoon. If all goes well, we might send him home on Monday, but Eric will need to rest for a few more weeks, Dr. Berger explained. I wouldn't suggest going back to work for at least 3 weeks, he added. When the doctor left, Nikki said she was eager to go home. I will hire a nurse to help you during the day, and I will take care of you at night, she said after hearing the doctor. Nikki seemed more cheerful. She kissed me, promising to return around 4 o'clock, and then she went out. After Nikki left, I tried to sleep but felt too anxious. Later, a nurse came in and removed the straps that were keeping my arms and legs still. She also took away the pillow that was supporting my head. It felt wonderful to move my arms and legs and turn my head to look outside. I was watching the pigeons on the window ledge when Detective Franca walked in. "Feeling better today, Mr. Anderson?" he asked. "I think so, yes," I replied. "It's hard to compare how I feel now with how I felt when everything was a blur. I think I'm doing better now." He said he just wanted to check if I remembered anything new that could help. "Something did pop into my mind last night, but I'm not sure if it's real or not," I said. "Let's hear it," he encouraged. Last night, I kept going over the events in my mind to see if anything new came up. Each time I remembered the same, but I noticed something I might not have thought about before. I still can't remember the shooter's face, but I think when I looked at the gun, he was holding it in his left hand. He wore a ring that didn't look like a wedding ring. It was on his middle finger and looked black, probably made of onyx. "Does that help?" "Yes, it does help," the detective replied. Detective Branca said that knowing our shooter is probably left-handed and wears an onyx ring is very helpful. It's not as good as knowing what his face looks like, but it still helps. "Anything else?" "No, that's all I can remember for now." We were quiet for a moment, and then I saw that Detective Trenchard was still wearing his brown suit. It almost made me laugh. He noticed me looking and glanced down at his clothes. "I see you noticed my new suit," he said, smiling at me. "I don't usually dress this way. Sorry. I didn't mean to stare." "It's okay," he replied. "We had a fire at our house, and I lost all my clothes." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Was your house badly damaged?" "The house is fine. Just my clothes burned," he said. "Somehow all my clothes ended up piled in the driveway and got soaked in gasoline. Then someone dropped a match next to the pile." "Wow, sounds like you lost everything but a pair of burnt socks," I said. "Yeah, I think my wife was pretty mad at me that night," he chuckled. "But I guess we'll figure things out. For now, I'm living in my car and had to buy this suit at the Salvation Army. It's the only thing I can wear right now." I felt bad for him. Detective Trenchard seemed like a nice guy, and I hated to think he was having trouble at home. I wondered what he could have done to make his wife so upset that it led to this situation. It made me think about how bad things could get in a marriage without trying to fix them. Detective Trenchard stayed with me for over an hour, but we just talked. I felt like he wanted to share something else but wasn't saying it. Finally, I asked, "I think there's something you're not telling me, but I feel like you want to. What is it?" "Remember when I told you that the shooter thought you were dead?" Detective Franca asked. "Yes, I remember," I replied, waiting for him to continue. "The shooter knew you weren't dead, but he was sure you would die. He wanted to cause you pain, so he aimed for your stomach instead of your head," Detective Trenchard explained. "Why?" I asked. "Why would he do that? Is it because he thought I could see him?" "I don't know, but I plan to find out," he said. Then, Detective Trenchard started asking me questions about my job and the people I worked with. It only hit me after he left that he might suspect someone I knew was the shooter. Over the next few days, I got stronger. The nurses helped me out of bed and walking in the halls. Nikki came to see me every morning. After her work, she came back for dinner and stayed until visiting hours were over. A couple of times when I felt lonely at night, I called Nikki at her parents' house and we talked for more than half an hour each time. But as I watched Nikki, I started to feel worried. I felt like I was getting stronger every day, but Nikki didn't seem to be doing well. Her skin looked dull, and her eyes were often puffy and red. I sensed she had lost some weight and wasn't resting well. She had gone through a tough time. The memory of lying on the floor with blood surrounding me and not knowing if I would live or die for over 3 days had kept her awake. I believed that once I got out of the hospital and we returned home, she would start to feel better. During those nights when I was alone and couldn't sleep, all I thought about was Nikki. I remembered how we first met during my senior year of college. We were introduced at a fraternity party, but not in the best way. She came as a date for one of my fraternity brothers. However, he was so drunk that he couldn't even stand up and had to ask me for a ride home. At that time, Nikki didn't make much of an impression on me or the other guys. She didn't talk to me until I dropped her off, and then she only thanked me for the ride. But Nicole Saunders, now she stood out to me. She was tall and slender with lovely features. She had light brown hair and big, expressive brown eyes. Her nose fit her face well, and her wide mouth could light up with a big smile. Sadly, she didn't smile at all during our car ride to her sorority house. I noticed her smile when she arrived at the party, and I felt a rush of jealousy towards her date. I didn't see her again for 2 weeks until another party. This time, when I ran into her, she smiled at me. "Eric Anderson, right?" she asked. "Yes, and you're Nicole Saunders?" I replied. "You remembered? I'm impressed. I thought after I was so rude to you when you gave me a ride home, you'd forget about me quickly," she said. I thought for a moment about how clever I could have been, but I decided to speak from the heart instead. "I was impressed by how little you seemed to care about me." This made her laugh. "I wasn't unimpressed," she said. "I was just really angry at Bob. He invited me to a party, then got so drunk he couldn't even take me home." She continued, "I let my anger affect how I acted towards you. I really appreciate that you were sober and drove me home without complaining. I had to take a chance. How could I complain about the chance to spend time with a beautiful girl like you?" I said. Nikki laughed and replied, "Thanks, I guess." "Have you forgiven Bob yet?" I asked. "No, and I don't plan to," she replied. "I just met him the week before, and it was our first and last date. He messed it up. I was definitely not impressed with him." I asked, "Then how about going on a date with me? I promise I'll stay sober long enough to get you home." "I'd love to," Nikki said. We went on our first date the next night, and by the end of the week, we were just a couple. I spent long nights alone in the hospital, thinking about our life together. Nikki and I got married a year after we finished college. She became a high school English teacher in the Los Angeles school district, and I started working to set up computer networks. We had been married for 6 years, and my recent trip to Dallas was only the second time we had been apart. The first time was a little over a year ago, at the end of the last school year. Nikki had chosen to go on a trip to Germany with the kids in her school's German club. I had to cancel my trip to Germany because of a work conference in Denver. Nikki was disappointed, but understood that I had to go. We were only apart for a week, but I missed her a lot. I got home from the conference on Thursday night, and Nikki returned from Germany on Saturday. I found myself lying in my hospital bed, recalling the special evening we had when she got home. I had set up a nice candlelit dinner, and after we ate, we went to our room. When Nikki came to me, I stood up, wrapped my arms around her, and we began to dance to some soft rock music. Afterwards, while we were hugging, Nikki said, "I brought you a gift from Germany." She walked over to her suitcase and started looking for something. Nikki returned and handed me a box that wasn't wrapped. She smiled at me as I tried to guess what it was. The box felt heavier than I thought it would, and that surprised me. I thought it might be a hat or something small. "Go ahead and open it," Nikki said happily. Inside the box was a beer glass. It was hand-painted and very beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had a few beer mugs and glasses, but nothing like this. This one came with papers saying it was one of only 1,000 made, making it a special piece to have. My collection included 5 mugs with names of beers that are no longer made, a pewter mug with a glass bottom I got as a gift, and 3 other mugs I found at garage sales. I never realized Nikki paid attention to my collection. "This is stunning, but I worry you spent too much on me," I said. "It must have cost a lot." She replied, "You deserve it. I can never spend too much on you." Nikki kissed me and sat on my bed. "Thanks, sweetie. I really love it," I said. "I knew you would," she replied. "As soon as I saw it, I knew I had to get it for you." Then unexpectedly, she started to cry. I asked her why, and she said, "I'm just so happy I could give you this gift. I knew it would mean a lot to you." I hugged Nikki tightly, holding her in my arms for a long time. Every time I think back to that night, my heart feels full. It was one of those moments I would always remember. I thought about how lucky I was to have Nikki in my life. Without her, I would have felt lost. Then it hit me that I was thinking about my life like an old man looking back. But I was young and had a lot of time to make new memories with Nikki. It was time to look ahead to what was next. By Monday, I was ready to go home. Nikki had taken a day off work and came to the hospital early to pick me up at 10 o'clock. An orderly rolled me to the main entrance and I got into Nikki's car. As we drove away, Nikki said we were going to her parents' house, but I told her I wanted to go home. The house hadn't been cleaned yet. She said that Detective Trenchard had given her the name of a cleaning service we could use. I called them on Friday to set up a visit for today. I wanted to be there when they cleaned and see what was gone for our insurance claim. On our way home, Nikki stayed quiet. I think she was nervous about my reaction to the mess we were facing. I told her it would be easier for me to get in through the front door instead of the garage stairs. Nikki parked in front and came around to help me out. She held my hand as we walked slowly to the front door. I started to feel anxious about what was inside, and I could tell Nikki was worried too. When she unlocked the door, I stepped inside first. As soon as I walked in, I noticed a strong smell like metal. Then I saw my small suitcase and bag at the bottom of the stairs. Both were covered in blood. There was also a big puddle of dried blood on the floor near my bags. I remembered the doctor saying I had lost about 2 pints of blood, but it felt like much more. When Nikki came in, she stood beside me and stared at the dark red puddle. Suddenly, she put her hand over her mouth and rushed to the bathroom. I could hear her being sick. It seemed the sight and smell were too much for her. I wanted to go help, but I was worried I wouldn't be able to handle it. I waited by the bathroom until she finished. After she washed her face, I guided her from the bathroom through the kitchen to the living room. I sat on the couch beside her and tried to comfort her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. I looked around and saw books and some items scattered across the floor. My collection of mugs and glasses were mostly on the shelves, except for the one Nikki had brought back from Germany. I wondered if that special mug had been taken. Just then, Nikki spoke up. "I'm sorry, Eric, I wanted to be strong for you, but seeing all that blood brought back memories." "I'm okay now," Nikki said. "Do you want some water?" I asked. "No, I'm fine. I need to take care of you," she replied. "I think we should get you to bed and then I can make you lunch and bring it upstairs." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "I'm not in good shape to go up the stairs right now, and you don't need to see the mess at the bottom again. I have a better idea. Why don't you make me a sandwich and put it in the fridge? Then you can go back to work." "I can't leave you here alone," Nikki said. "Look, you will feel better if you're not here when they clean up the blood. I'll be okay. I'll lie down on the couch and rest. When I'm hungry, I can get my sandwich. I don't know. I still don't like the idea of leaving you by yourself." "I'll be fine," I said. "School starts next week, and you still have a lot to do to get ready. I promise to behave, and will call you if I have any problems. When you get home, we can tidy up." That's when I noticed the broken glass scattered on the floor by the fireplace. Nikki saw where I was looking and started to cry. "It's okay, Nikki," I said. "The glass can be replaced. Just make my sandwich and go to work. Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "Okay, I'll go," she said. "I think you're right. I would feel better leaving until the hallway is cleaned up. I can't stand looking at it without feeling sick." "By the time you get home, it will be gone," I said. Nikki did as I asked. She made a sandwich for me and put it in the fridge. Then she left for work. Soon after, the cleaners arrived. About an hour later, while I was eating my sandwich, I opened the door for them. The man in charge looked at the blood on the floor. "Is this all of it, or is there more?" he asked. "That should be it, but you can check the stairs just in case," I replied. "It shouldn't take more than an hour to clean it all up." "Whose blood is that?" "Mine." "Wow, that looks like a lot," he said. "You're lucky to be okay." "How do you know it's that much?" I asked. "I've cleaned many scenes, and after a while you just learn," I said. "A crime scene? This is my house. It's hard to think of it that way." The cleaners started their work, and I went back to the kitchen to finish my sandwich. After I ate, I put my plate in the sink and headed back to the living room. Just as I was about to sit down, I remembered I should check the safe to make sure no one tried to break in. In our house, there was a cabinet built into the wall above the fireplace. It was built to hold a television. We had an entertainment center nearby, so I decided to keep my safe above the fireplace. The safe held important things like insurance papers, legal documents, savings bonds, and some stock papers. It also had about $100 in cash. The cabinet door was slightly open, so I thought the burglars must have seen the safe. But when I opened the door, the safe was fine. There were no marks on it, which meant no one had tried to break it open or move it. I opened the safe to check what was inside and saw that everything was still there. This made me feel good. I locked the safe again and closed the closet doors. I thought about cleaning up the mess in the room, but I felt too tired. Instead, I lay down on the couch to rest. By the time Nikki got back from work, the entrance was perfectly clean. The sharp smell in the air was gone, replaced by a sweet cinnamon scent. Though it was an odd smell for a freshener, I actually liked it. I had thought it was smart to let Nikki go to work that day, but when she came home, I wasn't sure anymore. She looked very stressed and worried. It took her 20 minutes and a big glass of whiskey to calm down. When I asked her what was wrong, she started to cry. "I just want it all to go away," she said. "I don't want to think about it anymore." I tried to reassure her, saying the police would catch the burglars soon, but that didn't seem to help. We didn't start cleaning up like I had planned. Nikki just wanted to sit next to me on the couch all evening. That night, Nikki and I slept close for the first time in 2 weeks, but nothing more. I wasn't ready for anything beyond that, and Nikki seemed hesitant to touch me. I had a hard time sleeping. I kept awakening, thinking I heard sounds in the house, and every time I woke, I found Nikki was already awake too. Tuesday was a little better. I felt stronger and could walk down the stairs by myself. I had breakfast with Nikki, and then cleaned the kitchen while she got ready for work. Later that morning, Detective Trinkhouse stopped by to check on me and to talk about what had been taken. I started making coffee. "Did you make a list of what's missing?" Detective Branca asked. "No, I haven't, because nothing seems to be gone," I replied. "Really?" Detective Branca said, sounding a bit surprised. "You might have thought of this already, but I believe at least 2 people were involved," I said. Detective Trinkhouse looked amused. "Let's be less formal. Call me Tony, and if you don't mind, I'll call you Eric." "I don't mind," I said. "Okay, Eric, let's hear your idea," Tony said. "Well, we know someone was upstairs because he was the one who shot me." The messy downstairs showed that someone had searched the first floor, but nothing was missing. This made me think that the person had left when they heard the gunshots or soon after. If they were really looking for things, why didn't they take the TVs, the CD player, or the DVD player? What caught my interest was the safe. Whoever searched the first floor must have seen it. So why didn't they try to open it or take it with them? Isn't a safe something a thief would want? I wondered. "I've been trying to figure that out too," said Tony. "Maybe the gunshots scared them off." "Do you think there's another reason?" I asked. "I like to keep my options open. Sometimes, if you try too hard to fit the facts into your ideas, you can end up with the wrong answer," Tony replied with a smile. I waited for Tony to share his thoughts, but it seemed he didn't want me too involved in his case. The coffee was done, so I asked if he wanted another cup. "I'd love to," he answered. I poured 2 cups, took them into the family room, and we sat down, me on the couch and Tony in the chair across from me. I noticed him looking around the room, taking in the mess from the burglars. "I guess I'll have to clean up after you leave," I said. "I've seen a lot worse damage from thieves," Tony said. "But I've also seen times when everything was in disarray except the stolen items." Just then, a question came to my mind that I didn't want to ask, but needed to. "Now that the guy who shot me knows I survived, do you think he might come back to try again?" I asked. "There's always that chance, but it seems unlikely. He knows you're alive, but also knows you can't describe him. If he comes after you now, he only makes it more likely he'll get caught." "Are you worried?" "Not for myself, but for Nikki's safety. I know she didn't sleep well last night, and I think it's because she's worried they might return," I said. "I can increase police patrols in your neighborhood for a while, if that helps." "Yeah, that would be great." I took a sip of my coffee and decided to shift the topic. "I see you're wearing a new suit today. How are things at home?" I asked. "Much better, thanks. My wife has forgiven me," Tony replied. "Almost," he added. "Tracy caught me with another woman at a party. I had too much to drink, and this woman was flirting with me. I got a bit carried away. Luckily, Tracy saw me before things went too far. She was really angry when she caught me cheating. I don't even want to imagine what she would have done if she caught me doing something more serious. The only reason I'm still in the clear is that Tracy knows I've never done anything like this before. I was starting to feel like Tony and I were becoming friends. Maybe I was wrong about that, but I felt comfortable talking to him, and he seemed relaxed with me. It's always nice to make new friends. Tony stayed for another cup of coffee, but then he had to leave when he got a call from his job. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. There wasn't much to clean, but I had to go slowly because I still felt weak. The saddest part of cleaning was picking up the broken pieces of the beer glass that Nikki had bought me in Germany. There were a lot of things scattered around the room, but the glass was the only broken item. It felt like someone had broken it just to be mean. Of the 13 mugs and glasses on the shelf, why did it have to be this special one? It was the most important one to me, and I was starting to get angry. But then I remembered that I had been shot 3 times too. I tried to see things in a better light. When I finished cleaning the first floor, I went upstairs. I found it strange that there was nothing else on the second floor. Nikki didn't have much expensive jewelry, but everything she owned was safe in a case on her dresser. Nothing was missing. This made me think that I might have come into the house right after the person who shot me went upstairs, so he didn't have time to look for valuables. It seemed like, even though I got shot, I had stopped the burglars from stealing anything. When Nikki came home from work that evening, there was no sign of what had happened in the house just a week and a half before. When Nikki saw that I had cleaned up, she got a bit upset. "You know you should still take it easy," she said. I didn't want to sit and look at the mess anymore. "Besides, I've been feeling pretty good all day," I replied. "Well, you don't look so good now," she said. "You're very pale. You're just sitting here while I make dinner. If you get up again, I'll call Dr. Berger and tell him to put you back in the hospital." She smiled when she said this. "Okay, I'll behave," I said. "Please don't send me back to the hospital." Nikki laughed at me. "Just sit back while I make you dinner," she said. After dinner, Nikki helped me to bed and changed my bandages. We were both happy to see no bleeding or problems with my wounds. After putting on fresh bandages, Nikki gave me a gentle massage. I think I got a bit too comfortable that day. I fell asleep before Nikki finished the massage. The next morning, I got up and had breakfast with Nikki. "There is an open house for new students at school today," Nikki said. "I can probably skip it if you want me to stay home." "How late are you coming back?" I asked. "It starts at 7 o'clock and ends at 8:30. I have to be home no later than 9 o'clock. I'll be home from school at 4 o'clock. Make dinner and change your bandages before I go to the open house. I need to leave by 6:30, Nikki said. "I think you should go," I replied. "We have to keep living our lives as normally as we can." I could see she was worried about me. When she leaned in to kiss me before leaving for work, she hugged me a little longer than usual. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." After Nikki went out, the house felt really quiet. I tried to think of something to do, but all my ideas felt too heavy for me right then. I had worked too hard the day before and promised Nikki and myself to take it easy today. I decided to turn on the CD player at a low volume. Then I took out the Dean Koontz book I bought but hadn't started yet and sat down to read. I read until lunchtime, only stopping when Nikki got home. She was happy I hadn't done too much, but she said I should have put the book down for a bit and taken a nap. After changing my bandages and making dinner, she got ready to leave for the middle school open house at 6:30. When she left, I went to the family room to watch TV. Sadly, the TV was only showing repeats of summer shows. I turned it off and sat down with my thoughts. I started thinking about the burglary and the shooting again. Something about the whole situation was bothering me. If this was the group Tony thought was involved, how could they have gotten away with nothing? I was still unsure about how they got into the house in the first place, and that made me worry. This uneasy feeling pushed me to check the safe again. Maybe there was something missing that I hadn't noticed before. When I opened the safe, I went through all my folders and made sure nothing was gone, but then I found something I had missed earlier. I stared at the 2 $300 airline vouchers, and my heart dropped as I realized their importance. I put them back in the safe and sat down on the couch to think. With this new understanding, I couldn't come to any other conclusion. "No way! This can't be happening!" I shouted. "Nikki, what have you done?" The ache in my chest felt worse than the hurt from my wounds. I was starting to feel like Nikki might have just broken everything for me. It still didn't make sense, so I knew I had to stay calm to avoid making a mistake. I thought about everything that could have happened, and I kept coming back to one thing. Nikki must have been in the house when I was shot. She had to have been upstairs with the intruder when I entered. I had to figure out what all this meant and what to do next. I was really angry and knew that when Nikki got home, the talk would be tough. I tried to think about what I would say to her, but my anger was so strong that I worried I wouldn't be able to hold it in. That scared me. Just thinking about Nikki up in our home with another man was driving me mad. I finally decided that it might be best not to talk to her at all because I was afraid I could hurt her feelings. After thinking through everything, I realized I needed to talk to Tony. But first, I wanted to speak to someone else. Jim Culkin and I had grown up in Glendale. We had been best friends for as long as I could remember. Jim was the best man at my wedding, and I was his. I hadn't seen much of Jim in the last couple of years. He still lived in Glendale while Nikki and I lived in Sherman Oaks, and getting together had become a bit hard. That evening I called Jim. "Hello, Jim." "Eric? Yeah, how are you?" "I'm fine, how about you?" he asked. "Not so good right now. I have a problem and I need your help," I said. "Of course, you can count on me," Jim replied. "What are friends for?" "I appreciate that, but I really need you as a lawyer this time." "What's the issue?" he asked. I explained everything to Jim. The shooting, the break-in that didn't seem to steal anything, and the airline vouchers and what they might mean. I also told him what I wanted his help with. "You can count on me," Jim said again. "When should I come over?" "Let's plan for 9 o'clock, I replied. "Okay, I'll be at your house at 9 o'clock, Jim said. "Thanks, Jim. I can't tell you how much this means to me." "What are friends for?" Jim said, and then we hung up. After talking to Jim, I called Tony on his cell phone. "Tony, this is Eric Anderson." "Eric, I'm glad you called. I have some news for you," he said. "Can you come here tonight at 9 o'clock? I have something important to discuss regarding the case." "You haven't been playing detective, have you?" I joked. "No, but I found something that could help us understand the case better. I'm not thrilled about it, but we need to talk," he said. "Now I'm really curious." "I'll be there at 9, I replied. After I hung up with Tony, I saw the time was 7:45. I still had an hour and 15 minutes before Jim and Tony would arrive. I hoped Nikki would be home before they got here so I wouldn't have to walk into a messy situation. I spent the next hour making a plan. I grabbed some paper and a pencil and sat at the kitchen table writing notes. I was still there when Nikki walked in at 8:50. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Just some notes for something I need to do later," I answered. "What kind of things?" "It's not important right now," I said. "We have guests coming over soon." "Who's coming?" "Jim Culkin and Tony Trenchard." "I said we haven't seen Jim in a while," Nikki said. "Why is he here?" I asked. "I told him about the shoot and he wanted to help out. I said it will be nice to see him again, but how can he help?" Nikki asked. "I guess we'll find out together." "Why did Detective Trenchard come?" she wondered. "He said he has some news about the case," I replied. Nikki looked worried. "Did they catch the robber who shot at you?" "I don't know," I said. "We will have to wait until he finds her to know for sure." Nikki went upstairs to change, and I sat down to wait for our guests. I hoped they would arrive soon. It was hard to hide my anger. Jim was the first to arrive at 9 o'clock. When he walked in, he looked me over, checking how I was doing. We were still in the entryway when Nikki came downstairs and hugged Jim. "It's great to see you, Jim," she said, kissing his cheek. Just as we started talking, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and welcomed Tony inside after introducing myself. He looked at me, maybe wondering what Jim was doing here. I said, "For now, let's just say Jim is here to watch." Tony accepted this, and we all went to the family room to sit down. I had already made coffee, so I asked Nikki to help serve it to our guests. After we all settled with our drinks, I turned to Tony. "I remember on the phone you said you had some news for us." "Yes, I want to tell you that the group of robbers we thought were involved in your shooting have been caught. They were arrested while robbing a house 10 blocks away this afternoon." I could tell from Tony's expression that he had more to say, and it might not be good. "Tony, I got the feeling you don't believe these are the robbers who shot at me." "How do you know that?" he asked. "Like I told you on the phone, I've made some progress on this case myself," I explained. Nikki took my arm and said, "What? Do you know who shot you?" "No, I don't know who shot me, but I think I can help Tony find out," I replied. I looked at Jim and he was quietly watching us. I turned to Tony, who was staring at me. "Okay, Eric, you have the floor," Tony said. "I'm eager to hear what you have to say. I need you to be patient. I want you to understand how everything happened for it to make sense. Take your time." "I'll wait for my questions," Tony replied. "So here's what happened tonight. I was checking the stuff in my safe when I found 2 American airline vouchers worth $300. Ever since I woke up in the hospital, I've tried hard to remember everything that happened from when I went into the house and walked upstairs to the moment I was shot. I hoped I would remember what the shooter looked like or have another clue, but the only detail I recalled was that he held a gun in his left hand and wore a dark ring. When I found the travel vouchers, I realized that I needed to go back even further to piece things together. One clear fact, which I didn't want to think about, was that my original plans were to arrive at the Los Angeles airport at 5:30 Friday evening after coming home from Dallas. Nikki was supposed to pick me up at the airport, and we planned to stop for dinner on the way home. However, my plans changed on Thursday. My project was ahead of schedule, which meant if we worked late, we could finish it and get home sooner on Friday. I spoke with my team and the client, and everyone agreed to stay late to finish the project. That evening, we took a break for dinner at 5, and I called the airline to ask if I could change to an earlier flight. The woman at American Airlines told me there was a 7:45 a.m. flight that would get me to LAX at 8:54 a.m. I asked her to book that flight. We finished our work at 11:30 Thursday night. On Friday morning, I was at the airport by 6:15 a.m. I grabbed a cup of coffee, a muffin, and a newspaper, and waited at my gate for the flight attendants to open their counter. When they did, I walked over to get my seat. I asked the flight attendant if the flight was full, and she said yes. I then asked if they needed volunteers for a later flight. She said they did, so I handed her my ticket and offered to change flights. In return, American Airlines gave me a $300 voucher for future trips and a seat on a flight scheduled for 9:15 a.m. That flight was also overbooked, so I received another $300 voucher and was put on a 10:05 a.m. flight. Thankfully, that flight wasn't crowded, and I arrived at the Los Angeles airport at 11:15 a.m. Within 20 minutes, I had collected my bags and caught a cab. The traffic on the roads was heavy that morning, but we still got to my house quickly. Once I got inside, I set my bags down in the hallway, just as the grandfather clock in the living room struck 12:15. I remembered looking at the clock and noting it was 12:15 until I found those vouchers. I couldn't recall what I was doing when I first walked in, but now I did. After placing my bags down, I walked to the family room, opened the safe, and stored the 2 vouchers inside. I locked the safe, returned to the foyer, picked up my bags, and headed upstairs. We all know what happened next. Nikki had been holding my hand tightly since we sat down at the table. When I reminded her about what happened on the stairs, she squeezed my hand even more. I suddenly remembered what I did when I got home and realized there were no thieves downstairs. There was simply no place for someone to hide. If anyone had been in the room, I would have noticed. I also would have seen any mess they made, but there wasn't any. This made everything confusing. I walked into the house at 12:15 p.m. There were no signs of a break-in on the first floor. By the time I got upstairs, 2 more minutes had passed, and I was shot at 12:17. 8 minutes later, at 12:25, Nikki found me and called for help. This meant that in the 8 minutes between when I got shot and when Nikki called for help, if there were burglars, they had decided to mess up the first floor to make it look like someone broke in, but they hadn't stolen anything. Nothing made sense. If the burglars were in the house but didn't take anything and even shot me, why would they mess up the family room to make it look different? Why not just leave and make it look like I was murdered? Why would they want to attract attention? It seemed very planned out. Tony said to me, "I can see you're starting to think like I am. So who do you think shot you and why?" I still had no idea who shot me or why, but I believed someone else knew. I mentioned I thought there were 2 people upstairs that day. One of them shot me. The other one stayed with me and watched me bleed for 8 minutes before calling for help. During that time, the one who shot me messed up the family room to make it seem like a robbery. Nikki had pulled away from me and was now crying, curled up in a little ball on the couch. "I think Nikki knows who shot me and why," I told Tony. He didn't seem surprised. "I'm sorry, Eric. I was starting to believe that too," he said. "I'll need to take her in for questioning." "Tony, can we have a few minutes?" I asked. "I'm not sure that's a good idea right now. I think it's best to wait until we sort this out." "Not for me. I want Nikki to talk to Jim. He's her lawyer." "You arranged for your wife to be here with her lawyer even though she might be involved in your shooting?" Tony asked. I didn't know what happened between Nikki and the person who shot me, but I didn't think she would have done anything to cause it on purpose. I just want to make sure she gets good legal advice from someone she trusts. "If you let Jim speak with Nikki for a few minutes, I believe she'll help you and answer your questions." Nikki was still curled up on the couch and didn't say a word. "I agree with you," Tony said. "She can talk to Jim, and then I will give her a chance to come to the station on her own and answer questions. If she says no, we will get a warrant for her arrest. There's nothing more I can do." Jim, Tony, and I stood up and headed to the door. I shook Tony's hand and thanked him for letting Nikki come on her own. Jim shook Tony's hand too. "I'll have her at the station in an hour," Jim said. "I know her well." "I think she will want to help," Jim added. "I hope you're right," Tony said as he turned to leave, and the door closed behind him. Jim looked at me and said, "I'm going to talk to her. You know that anything Nikki tells me will be private and I can't share it with you?" "I understand," I replied. "I asked you to do this because I know Nikki will feel more at ease with you helping her instead of someone she doesn't know. I would never use our friendship to make you betray her trust, and I know you wouldn't do that even if I asked," Jim said. I understood that usually Jim would see my point. "But these aren't normal times. Is there anything you want me to tell Nikki?" I said, "If the police let her go after questioning, she will need to go to her parents. I still care about her, but I can't be with her right now. Tell her I will call her dad and let him know what is happening. I'm sure he will come to the station with her." "You seem like you want to say more," Jim said. "What is it?" "I just don't know how this will end. It's not good for my marriage," I replied. "I want you to do what you can for Nikki in this situation, but please do not represent her in the divorce plans. I know you can't help me with that. It would create a conflict, and I really don't want my best friend sitting beside my wife in divorce meetings." "If she asks, just send her to another lawyer," I said. "Sure, I'd rather stay out of those divorce proceedings between you and Nikki," he replied. "Let me go talk to her now. I think it's best if you don't speak to Nikki again until everything is settled. If you have to say something to her, just call me." "Okay," I agreed, and told Jim that I would communicate with Nikki through her parents if needed. I went upstairs to our bedroom while Jim went to the family room to talk to Nikki. 20 minutes later, Jim called me down. "Eric, Nikki would like to go upstairs and grab some clothes. I will go to my office and help her pack." I wanted to ask if Nikki agreed to help with the police investigation, but I knew I couldn't. Jim would share what he could, and otherwise I would just have to wait and see what would happen. While Nikki packed upstairs, I sat at my desk, trying to understand everything that had happened that day. There had never been any sign of trouble in our marriage, or maybe I just hadn't noticed. The thought that Nikki might have been with another man in our room seemed impossible, but the signs made me think otherwise. Tony must have felt the same way. Could it be true? Was Nikki really seeing someone else? Was her friend the one who shot me? Tony told me that the shooter wanted me gone, but wanted me to suffer first. Why would that be? I wondered if knowing who shot me would help me understand better. The hardest part for me was figuring out why Nikki didn't call for help right away. It took her 8 minutes to call. Did she want me to die? Did she really dislike me that much? I found it hard to believe. Nikki had always been a caring wife. After I was shot, she did her best to show me her love. I thought maybe she felt guilty, but what if there was something darker going on? Was she trying to prove that she had nothing to do with my shooting? What worried me most was the chance that I might never learn the truth about what happened. The next part of my day started when I heard footsteps coming to my office. I quickly wiped my eyes and turned as the door opened. Jim looked in. "Eric, we're about to leave. You were going to call Nikki's dad, right?" "I'll call him in a few minutes." "Thanks, Jim." I sat at my desk and listened for the front door to close. I felt like I could break, but I knew I had to hang on a little longer. I still needed to call Nikki's father, and I wanted to reach him before he went to sleep. No one wants to hear bad news, especially at night. "George?" "Oh, Eric, how are you?" Nikki's father asked. "Her condition is getting better," I said. "But I have something difficult to tell you." There was silence for a moment on the line. "What is it, Eric?" he asked. "Nikki is at the Sherman Oaks police station. They are asking her questions about my shooting." "Oh my God, you can't be serious," he replied. "You can't think Nikki had anything to do with this." "George, I know this is shocking, but I'm trying to figure it out just like you." I took a deep breath. "I need you to go to the police station and support her. She will need to stay with you and Mary for a while." "Eric, I don't know what to say. This must be a mistake. Nikki loves you. I can't believe this." "I'm very sorry, George. I know this is hard." "Are you going to the station?" he asked. "Of course." "What will you do about Eric?" he wanted to know. "I'm not sure yet. Please don't do anything hasty. Let's wait until we understand what really happened," he replied. "I will, George. Thank you." After I hung up the phone, I rested my head on the table trying to clear my mind. This was going to be the toughest time since everything began. I hadn't had a chance to think about what it all meant before. From the moment I found the travel vouchers in the safe, I was busy with things I needed to do. I had to call Jim and explain everything. I also needed to reach out to Tony and ask him to come to our place. I needed to find a way to explain everything to Tony so he would get it. After that, I had to speak to Nikki's dad. Now that those things were done, I was left alone to think about what had happened to me and what I should do next. No matter how hard I tried, a certain thought stuck in my mind. Nikki had someone else, and he shot me. He wanted me gone so Nikki would choose him. Did he plan to kill me? Or did he just pull the trigger because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time? How long had this relationship been going on? With all these thoughts spinning in my head, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. So I took one of the pain pills that the doctor gave me and laid down. The strong medicine made me drift off in less than 10 minutes. When I woke up on Thursday, I felt empty. How would I live without Nikki? I was very mad at her, but at the same time, I missed her a lot. I tried to figure out my next steps, but my mind kept returning to thoughts of Nikki's betrayal. I knew I had to move past all of this, but it wouldn't be easy. The phone rang a few times that morning, but I let the answering machine pick up. Some calls were from the school asking about Nikki. Nikki's mom called, wanting to talk to me, but I wasn't ready for that talk. There were several calls with no messages left. I wondered if these calls could be from Nikki's lover. At last, around 5 o'clock, Tony called. When I heard his voice, I picked up. "Tony, it's me." "Hey, Eric, how are you holding up?" he asked. "Not too good. Do you have any scotch at home?" Tony asked. "Yeah, I have a bottle." "Why?" he replied. "I'd like to come over for a drink," he said. "Sure, come on over. I could use the company," I said. An hour later, Tony sat in the chair across from me, swirling ice in a glass of scotch. "Sorry I can't share more right now," Tony said. He had just told me that Nikki had been helpful and answered all the questions they asked her. He said she was at the station for 2 hours before they let her go home with her dad. Tony mentioned they now knew who shot me, but he couldn't tell me until that person was arrested. Apparently, whoever shot me had been out of town for a meeting and was expected back on Sunday. They didn't want him to know they were searching for him. Tony suggested they could have asked the police in Colorado, where he was at a meeting, to take him in. But then, they would have to deal with a long process to bring him back, which could slow things down. Instead, the assistant district attorney decided to wait until Sunday to pick up the person from his home. I thought it was better for the Denver police to get him. I preferred that he stayed in jail and waited to be brought back instead of him finding out we were looking for him and possibly running away. But I wasn't so sure. I felt a bit relieved that they knew who shot me, but the fact that they learned that from Nikki only made me doubt what I hoped wasn't true. Nikki was mixed up in this. Tony told me he didn't know what Nikki said to the investigator because he wasn't there for her interview. He also said that even if he had been there, he couldn't share that with me. He explained that the investigation was still happening, so he couldn't tell me more than he already had. I took a sip of whiskey and stared at the slow-moving fan on the ceiling. I cannot really understand how I feel about all this. "I guess I'm just confused," I said. "That makes sense," Tony replied. "Things will be clearer next week. You know what I would do if I were you? "I'd get away from here," he said. "What do you mean?" "Where would I go?" I asked. "To the beach, to Vegas, to Hawaii. Just get away for a bit." "A change of scenery will help you," he said. I considered it and said, "You might be right. There's nothing tying me down here right now. Maybe relaxing on a beach is exactly what I need." "I'll call you if anything happens that you should know about," Tony said. "I think I will. I don't know where I'll go yet, but I'll find a place. Thanks for the suggestion." "You'll call me if anything happens, right?" I asked. "I said I'd call, didn't I?" Tony replied. He stayed another hour and just talked with me. At first I thought he wanted to gather information, but he just wanted to chat before leaving. He took my cell phone number and asked me to tell him where I would be staying. After Tony left, I wondered where I could go to take a break. Hawaii sounded great, but I didn't feel up for a long flight. The places I thought of were either too far away or not far enough to make me feel better. By the time I went to bed, I still hadn't decided anything. On Friday morning, I called my office to see how things were going while I was away. I felt both relief and disappointment when I found out they were doing just fine without me. I spoke to my boss, Charlie Carson, about when I could come back, and he told me not to worry about it. "Whenever you're ready, your job will be here for you," Charlie said. "How is Nikki managing with everything now?" "She's doing about as well as anyone could expect in this situation," I said. I didn't mention to him that she was part of the shooting event. At that moment, it seemed best that fewer people knew about it. "I understand how hard it is for you to just sit there," Charlie said. "What will you do to keep busy?" he asked. "I've decided to leave town for a couple of weeks," I replied. "Where are you going?" Charlie asked. "I haven't decided yet," I said, "but I can't go too far. I can't sit still for more than a couple of hours, so no long car rides or flights." "What about Vegas?" suggested Charlie. "I'm not sure," I replied. "I've thought about it, but I don't want to stay in one of those big hotels. I need somewhere I can be alone. It would be nice to have some privacy, but still be close to a casino and good restaurants." "I might have a solution for you," said Charlie. "I have a small house in Vegas, a few miles from the Strip. I bought it a few years ago before prices went up. You're welcome to use it." "That's really kind of you, but—" I started, but Charlie cut me off. "Actually, it would help me out. We haven't been there in almost 3 months. I'd appreciate it if you could check on things, make sure there are no leaks, and that the air conditioning is working." "Since you put it that way, I think I can do that. It's just a short flight and a cab ride. I'll make it happen," I said. "Thanks." "Okay, I need you to do a couple of things while you're there," he said. "Sure, whatever you need." "There's an old Honda Civic in the garage. You might have to charge the battery, but I want you to use it while you're there, and please fill the gas tank before you leave. Also, on your way back, could you buy a case of Heineken and put it in the fridge? We're going there next month, and it would be nice to have a cold drink waiting for us." "I can do that. Maybe I'll get some for myself, too." "Thanks, Charlie," I said. "I'm glad this works for you," Charlie said. "I'll drop off the key at your house on my way home from work tonight." I decided to fly to Vegas in the morning, so I called to book my tickets. Later that afternoon, I called Nikki's parents' house. "Hello. Hi, Mary, it's Eric." "Eric, do you want to talk to Nikki?" Mary asked. "No, I can't talk to her right now," I replied. "Please, she really needs to talk to you," said Mary. "I'm sorry, I just can't handle this right now. I called to let you know I'm going out of town for a while. I'll be leaving in the morning, so tell Nikki she can stop by our house for clothes or anything else after 10 tomorrow morning." "I'll tell her, Eric, but can't you talk to her yourself?" Mary asked. "Mary, I just can't. I'm too upset to talk to her right now. I'm sorry," I said. "I understand. I hope you can work things out," Mary replied. I didn't understand why, but Mary's last comment really upset me. "Just deal with it, Mary," her partner snapped at me. That didn't leave room for forgiveness. Before Nikki's mom could say anything else, I hung up. After that call, I felt uneasy. I was embarrassed for how I had treated Mary, and I secretly wished things could improve, but I couldn't see how. The rest of the day, I focused on my relationship with Nikki. I tried to think of any small sign that might show there was something wrong in our marriage, but I couldn't find anything. I couldn't recall a single moment when I thought Nikki had done something that made me suspicious of her faithfulness or indicated other problems between us. Instead, all I remembered were the ways she showed her love for me. I couldn't think of even one time when I doubted Nikki loved me as much as I loved her. How all of this could have happened didn't make any sense to me. I hoped that my time in Las Vegas would give me some answers. That evening at 6:30, Charlie stopped by and handed me the keys and directions to his place in Las Vegas. "I think you and Nikki will really like this house," Charlie said. "Nikki isn't coming with me," I replied, instantly wishing I hadn't said that. "Why not?" Charlie asked. "She can't go," was the best excuse I could think of. "Classes start on Monday, so she'll have to stay here." "Charlie, do me a favor, don't tell anyone where I am." "No one will know unless you tell them yourself," Charlie replied. After Charlie left, I called Tony to let him know I was going to Vegas. "What hotel are you staying at?" he asked. "I'm not staying in a hotel. I'll be at a friend's house," I said. "Good. Who else knows where you are?" he questioned. "Only my boss, but that's just because it's his house," I explained. "Why?" "I'd rather not have too many people knowing where I am until we have a suspect caught. I don't like the idea of waiting for this guy to come back to arrest him. Too many things can go wrong. The fewer people who know, the better." "I'm glad you asked your boss to keep quiet then," Tony said. "Thanks," I replied. "Did you talk to your wife?" "No. I called her mother this morning to say I was leaving for a while. She wanted me to talk to Nikki, but I said no." "That's smart. It's best if you don't contact her until we figure this out," Tony advised. "I have your cell number so I can reach you if needed. Just make sure to have your phone with you." "Wow, you're really looking after me, aren't you?" I joked. "Just remember what I said. This guy didn't just shoot you by mistake. He wanted you gone, slowly and painfully." "I think if he had another chance, he would have killed you," Tony said. "I could be wrong, but my 15 years as a cop tell me I'm right." "I understand. I'll take your warning seriously and be careful," I replied. "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" "Yes. The Ada plans to talk to your wife again tomorrow. Do you have anything we could ask her that might help with this case?" he asked Tony. "I've been thinking about this all day and couldn't come up with anything. Nikki has never done anything that would make me suspicious. I can't think of anything that might help your investigation. I want to help. I need answers just like you do," I said. "I'm sure you do," he replied. "When are you leaving?" "I have a 9-hour flight out of Burbank." "Well, enjoy your trip. I'm not sure what else to call it." "Try to relax and save your strength. Some tough parts of this case are still ahead and you need to be ready for them," Tony said. "Tony, I really appreciate everything you've done. It's only been 2 weeks since this trouble started, and the best part is I feel like I have a new friend," I said. "You're right. You have made a friend. I don't usually get so personally involved in things. I just hope that when this is over, you'll still think of me as a friend," Tony said. "I don't think that will be a problem. I value friendship, and I think having a cop as a friend will be smart for me," I replied. "You know, you're not as clueless as you seem," Tony said. "I hear that a lot." After our conversation, I went to pack for the trip. I needed enough clothes for a 2-week stay. I couldn't handle heavy bags yet, so I took a small suitcase and a carry-on. I packed mostly socks and underwear, 3 pairs of pants, 3 shorts, and 6 short-sleeve shirts. I knew Charlie's house had a washer and dryer, so I didn't need to take too many shirts and pants. If I needed anything else, I could buy it in Vegas. Next chapter. At 10:30 Saturday morning, I was in a cab in Las Vegas, heading west on Charleston Boulevard. The temperature that morning was already 101 degrees and rising. When I stepped out of the airport, it felt like I had walked into a furnace. Luckily, the cab had good air conditioning. Charlie Carson's house was on Desert Foothills Drive, about 7 miles west of Las Vegas Boulevard. When the cab stopped in front of the house, I was surprised. Charlie had said it was a small house. I guess it was small if you consider 3,500 square feet small. The house was finished in white stucco with a red tile roof, like many other houses in the neighborhood. But this one looked more elegant. The front had heavy red oak double doors with stained glass windows. The doors opened into a big entrance hall with a stone floor. The air conditioning was already running, making the house comfortably cool at 72 degrees. As I walked around, I realized it was a smart home. Charlie could control the temperature, alarms, and lights from his phone or computer. There were security cameras by the front door, above the garage, and at the back of the house, looking over the back door and the pool. Everything felt modern. Inside, the house looked like a picture from a fancy magazine. The master bedroom was on the second floor and was very big. It took up the whole back of the house, with windows facing both east and west. The windows to the west had a lovely view of the mountains, while the east windows looked out at hotels along the street and the pool in the backyard. The back of the house faced east, which kept the patio cool and shaded while the sun shone on the large pool. The beauty of the house made me feel a little better. I thought to myself, Nikki would love this. But then the sadness I had been feeling for the past 3 days came back. Why did I miss her so much and feel so angry at her at the same time? I was at Charlie's house, alone because of what Nikki had done. I tried to push my thoughts of Nikki aside and think about how to spend the rest of the day. The pool looked nice, but I decided to do other things first since I still had some energy. I knew that as the day went on, I would feel more tired. This had been happening since I woke up in the hospital almost 2 weeks ago. In the mornings, I felt better, but by afternoon, I felt weaker and weaker. My first task was to start the Honda parked in the garage so I could go grocery shopping. The car was 10 years old, but Charlie had taken great care of it. I was happy to find that the battery was fine, and the car started right up. As I drove out of the garage, I remembered seeing a shopping center nearby when I had been in the taxi. It was only about 5 blocks away, and I found it easily. I bought enough food, soft drinks, and beer to last me for a week and then headed back home. When I parked the car in the garage, I realized how tired I was. I barely had enough strength to bring the groceries inside, but I managed to lay everything out. After that, I poured myself a big glass of orange juice, hoping it would help me feel stronger. I made a sandwich, and after eating, I decided to relax by the pool and enjoy the sun for a while before it disappeared behind the house. I put on my swim trunks and went into the bathroom to take off my bandages and put on some sunscreen. When I looked in the mirror, I saw 3 ugly scars from bullet wounds. I thought they could make for an interesting story. The scars made me feel a bit shy, so I would put on a shirt before going outside and wait until the neighbors were not around before taking it off. The hot weather pushed me to go to the pool to cool down. After feeling refreshed, I climbed out of the pool and sat down in a lounge chair. I was about to close my eyes when my cell phone rang. It was Eric. "Hey, Tony, how's it going?" he asked. "Good. Listen, Eric, I need to ask you a few questions if you don't mind." "No problem. Ask whatever you want," I replied, though I couldn't guess what he wanted to know. "Tell me about Sarah," Eric said. "Sarah Bowden. What does she have to do with this?" I asked. "I don't know. I hope you'll tell me," he replied. Sarah was a girl I knew in college. "Did you date her?" he asked. "Yes, I went out with her a few times." "Did you get close with her?" he pressed. I was starting to feel annoyed. "What's this all about?" I asked. "Sorry, Eric, just part of the investigation," he said. "So did you get close with her?" "No." "And then?" "Is that why you two stopped seeing each other, because she didn't want to get closer?" he asked. "No, it wasn't like that at all," I said, letting him know I was getting upset. "We dated a few times and realized it wasn't going anywhere, so we both decided to stop." "Were you still in touch after that?" "Yes. We kept talking, but we never had a serious relationship." I wondered why he was asking me about a girl I dated many years ago. It's just that something came up in the investigation that I need to follow up on. "Were you dating your wife at that time?" "No, I hadn't met Nikki yet." "Okay, then tell me more about your relationship with Sarah. What do you want to know?" I asked. "Why don't you start with how you met?" I took a deep breath, trying to remember. It was a Saturday night, and I was heading back to my frat house after a party. I stopped to get gas at a mini-mart at the gas station. While filling up, I saw a couple in a car nearby. The guy was yelling at the girl. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded intense. After I finished, I went to pay in the store. As I was leaving, the guy from the other car walked in. "Did you know him?" asked Eric. "No. We didn't even look at each other as we passed." When I got back to my car, the girl jumped out and begged me to take her with me. I noticed she had a bruise under her eye and thought her boyfriend must have hurt her. I told her to get in my car, and we drove away before her boyfriend came out of the store. She looked really upset. I asked her where she wanted to go, and she said she needed a place to get a cup of coffee. The only place open that night was Denny's. We found a quiet table, ordered 2 cups of coffee, and just sat there. Finally, I asked her why her boyfriend hurt her. She said he wasn't really her boyfriend. She had gone out with him a couple of times, but he started to act very needy. Earlier that night, she was at a dance having fun with a friend when he came in, grabbed her arm, and pulled her away. She said he forced her into his car and began accusing her of being with someone else. When I saw them at the gas station, she tried to explain to him that they weren't serious and she could dance with whoever she wanted. That's when he hurt her. After he went into the store to buy cigarettes, she jumped out of the car and asked me to help her. We talked for a long time that night, and then I drove her back to the hostel. When I dropped her off, she thanked me for helping her and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. I wasn't sure what to do, so I asked her out. By the end of our first date, I realized we didn't really click. I thought about ending it, but I felt she wanted me to ask her out again. So I did. By the third or fourth date, we both saw that it wasn't working out. We decided to part as friends. "You stayed friends?" Tony asked. I think we would have, but after that, I started seeing her less. I saw her on campus a few times in the following month, but we never talked after that. Who was the guy who hurt her? Tony wanted to know. I don't know. I can't remember if she told me his name. So, is there anything else you can share about Sarah Bowden? Tony asked. Not really. This is the first time anyone has brought her up since college. I paused. Oh, wait. Nikki asked me about her a year ago. Why did she ask? Tony asked. I'm not sure, I replied. It was right after she got back from Germany. I had made a nice dinner to welcome her home. While we were eating, Nikki asked me if I knew Sarah Bowden. And what did you tell her? Tony asked. I told her the truth, that I met her a few times in my junior year. And Nikki didn't say why? He asked. She said someone told her to ask about Sarah, but she didn't say who. I paused. Why was your wife in Germany? She was a chaperone, I said, for a trip with the German club at the high school where Nikki teaches. Who else was on the trip with her? German teacher Carol Stanley and her husband Jacques, European history teacher Barbara Martin and her husband Cal, counselor Janice Whiting, and gym teacher John Parker, I said. I noticed Tony's expression changed for a moment, as if something registered with him. Why didn't you go with your wife? I was meant to go, but I had to cancel because I needed to attend a technical education conference in Denver that was at the same time, I said. Did your wife stop talking about Sarah Bowden? No. So that's it? Yes, I hope so, Tony replied. What does that mean? I asked. I don't know if Sarah Bowden has anything to do with this case, but I have to check it out. I just hope you've told me everything about your relationship with her. Now I felt uneasy. Was Tony suggesting I had done something wrong with Sarah? I thought we were friends, but he was saying strange things. Why are you asking me about Sarah? I asked. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you anything right now, he replied. Why are you looking for trouble? I thought we were friends. That's the problem. A friend is a cop. I still have to do my job, Tony said and ended the call. Do your job? Nonsense. Someone was trying to ruin the investigation by bringing Sarah into it. I couldn't understand how she could be involved in this situation. I spent the rest of the weekend relaxing. I stayed by the pool a lot and read books from Charlie's library. The boss really surprised me. Who would have thought he'd have such a great collection? I didn't think he liked reading. On Monday, I decided to get more active. I walked 2 miles in the morning and started swimming laps in the afternoon. I waited for a call from Tony on Monday to say they had caught my shooter, but he didn't call. After lunch, I called Nikki's dad to check on her. After saying hello, I asked how Nikki was doing. Eric, did you know that Nikki quit her job? George asked. She quit? Why? I replied. She said she was worried about rumors spreading after everything happened, George explained. But I think there's more to it. I felt confused. Nikki loved teaching, so I felt bad for her, but I also thought she made this choice herself. Please tell her I'm sorry she had to leave her job. I will, Eric, he said. I didn't have anything else to say, so I ended the call. Later, when I still hadn't heard from Tony by late Tuesday night, I thought about calling him, but part of me didn't want to talk to Tony. I was still a bit upset about how he questioned me about Sarah Bowden. On Wednesday morning, I got a call from Charlie. How's the house doing, Eric? He asked. It's fine, Charlie. You said it was a small house. I replied, compared to my place in Sherman Oaks, it is. He said, so did you start the car? Yeah, I started it and got some cases of Heineken, but I don't think it'll be enough before you arrive. I might have to grab more before heading home. So what's happening over there? Not much, but a police detective came by this morning asking about you. Hey, what are you doing? Charlie said, and I could feel my frustration rising again. Why was Tony investigating where I worked? What did he want to know? I asked him. He wanted to check if I knew where you were. He already knows where I am, I said. Oh, wait. Maybe he doesn't. I told him I was staying at a friend's place, but I didn't say whose or where it was. Did you tell him where I was? I asked. Yes, but I hope it's okay, he replied. It's fine if I tell the police where I am, I said. We talked more about work and projects. Charlie said he hoped I'd be back soon. I felt good after the call, so I poured myself a drink and relaxed in the pool. It was nice to cool off. When I didn't hear from Tony by 5 p.m., I decided to go to the Strip for some fun. I planned to play blackjack and then get dinner. I thought about going to the Bellagio, but then I remembered how much Nikki loved that place and I didn't want to think about it tonight. Instead, I went to Treasure Island. I played blackjack for 3 hours until I felt really tired. I gave up on dinner at a fancy restaurant and headed back home. I got back just before 9 o'clock. While I was in the kitchen making a sandwich, I saw I had missed a call on my phone. I must have been too busy at the casino to notice. I checked my voicemail and it was from Tony asking me to call him back. I was still mad at him, so I waited until I finished my sandwich before calling him. You wanted me to call? I said when he answered. Where have you been? He asked. Calm down. I left tonight. Sorry for being rude, but we have a problem, Tony said. We don't know where he is. Who? I asked. Our suspect. He explained. He didn't come back from his meeting in Denver. We know he checked out of the hotel, went to the airport, and boarded a flight to L.A., but we lost track of him at LAX. So the guy who shot you is still out there. Really? How could that happen? I asked. I'm sorry, buddy, but it's not my fault. I wanted him picked up in Denver, but they said no. Now he's loose. We can't tell if he knows we are looking for him. We hope he doesn't. You should be safe where you are. We're also watching over your wife. He added, we don't think she has contacted him, but we are doing everything we can to make sure she doesn't. I asked, do you think Nikki might have told him we were looking for him? I wouldn't think so, but who knows? How are you holding up? Tony asked. I'd feel a lot better if you'd stop prying into my life and catch this guy, I said. What do you mean by that? Tony replied. You called me about a girl I knew over 10 years ago and wouldn't say why. This morning you started asking around at my job about me. What are you talking about? Tony said. My boss called me and told me you were asking questions about me. No way. That wasn't me, Eric. What kind of questions? Tony replied. Did you send someone else? No, I didn't. Charlie told me that a police officer asked him where I was, and he told him, oh no, you need to leave your house right now. Get a hotel room and only talk to me, Tony said urgently. Do you think you'll come here? I asked. I don't know, but it seems likely. Why else would he know where you are? Tony replied. So, who is this guy? I asked. John Parker, the gym teacher at the school, I said. Right. How well do you know him? Tony asked. Not really. Nikki talked about him a lot when he first started at school 2 years ago. She thought he would be a good gym teacher and soccer coach. I've never met him, I explained. Oh, wait, Nikki once told me Parker said he knew who I was from college, but you don't know him? I don't remember his name, and I wouldn't recognize him if I saw him, I said. Suddenly, another thought crossed my mind. Is Nikki really with John Parker? My chest tightened. How long has this been going on, and how did I not see any signs? I felt hurt and angry at the same time. So, we still don't know what kind of relationship Mr. Parker has with your wife. We only know what she told us, but we will find out, Tony said. What did Nikki tell you? I pressed. I'm sorry, Eric, but I can't share that with you right now. I promise I'll tell you everything as soon as I can. For now, just leave the house and find somewhere else to stay. He could be here already. The flight from LAX to Vegas is quick, Tony warned. Sure, he could be there, but he hasn't flown. We've been watching the airports and checking his credit card. He hasn't spent any money today. If he's in Vegas, he drove there, I explained. Leave now and make sure no one is following you. If you think someone is tailing you, call me right away, Tony instructed. What can you do from LA if I'm being followed? I asked. I can call the Las Vegas police to help you, he replied. Okay, I'm leaving, I said. I hung up and started turning off the lights. When it was dark in the house, I looked outside for any parked cars. There were none. I walked to the garage and got into Charlie's Honda. During all this, I felt so many emotions, but sitting in the dark now, fear was new to me. I started my Honda and waited a few moments before pressing the button on the remote to open the garage door. When the door was up, I drove out, quickly closed the door, and turned left onto the street. Part 3. I was 2 blocks away from home, and there were no other cars around. No one seemed to be following me. I began to worry that it wasn't John Parker visiting Charlie that morning. Maybe it was a police officer and Tony just didn't know. I was at a red light, waiting to turn left onto Charleston Boulevard, when I noticed a silver Ford Explorer turning right from Charleston onto Desert Foothills Drive. I looked quickly at the SUV. I couldn't see the driver because of the dark windows, but I noticed it had California license plates. I remembered seeing California plates once before in Nevada. It didn't surprise me, but seeing a California car turn onto the street where I was staying felt like too much of a coincidence. I drove east through Charleston, trying to figure out which hotel to go to. When I reached the I-15 interchange, I made up my mind. I turned right onto the southbound I-15. If John Parker was looking for me in Las Vegas, I decided to head back to Los Angeles. My 10-year-old Honda did well, easily keeping up speeds of 75 to 80 miles per hour all the way to the 10. Things slowed a bit as I approached Burbank, but by 2:30 a.m., I was in town and checked into a small hotel near the Burbank airport. I wasn't sure if it was safe to drive home because I still didn't know if John Parker was searching for me in Vegas. Maybe he was watching my house, or perhaps he was already on his way to Mexico. I really didn't know what was happening. I sat on the bed in my small hotel room and began to ask myself questions, trying to understand everything. Why did John Parker want to harm me? Did he want me out of the way to be with Nikki? That seemed possible, but it didn't add up. If he wanted Nikki and she wanted to be with him, they didn't need to hurt me. A divorce would have been simpler. I didn't have much money that Nikki could take. She could have managed on her own after a divorce. Something else had to be going on. I started wishing I had shared what I knew with Nikki earlier. I should have talked to Tony and Jim first. Maybe Nikki would have opened up about her troubles. My body was sore, my head was starting to ache, and I needed some rest. In the morning, I called Tony and let him know where I was. I also told him about the California car I had seen the night before. "What kind of car was it?" Tony asked. "It was a silver Ford Explorer," I replied. "That might be his Explorer," Tony said. "We found out last night that Mr. Parker had left his Ford Explorer at the Los Angeles airport before he went to Denver. We managed to capture a picture of him with the security camera as he drove out of the parking lot on Sunday night." "Where are you now?" I asked. "I'm in hotel room 254. After about 45 minutes, Tony knocked on my door. When he came in, he carried a briefcase and placed it on the small table in the room. He opened the briefcase and took out a photo, holding it out for me to see. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. The photo was in black and white, taken from above. It showed a man sitting in the driver's seat of a car. He had dark hair and a normal-looking face. He seemed a bit overweight, but it was hard to tell from the picture. I didn't recognize him. I looked at Tony and asked, "Is that John Parker?" "That's him," Tony replied. "Have you seen him before?" I said no. "He doesn't look familiar to me at all." I told him I had informed the Las Vegas police and the Nevada State Police to look for his car. "They will arrest him if they find it," Tony said. "I think you should see this." He then took a videotape from his briefcase and put it on the table. "I'm not supposed to let anyone watch this yet, but I wanted to show you. You don't have to tell anyone I gave it to you." "I won't tell," I said. "But what is it?" "You'll just have to wait and see," Tony replied. "I need to go back to the station. Things have been a bit hectic since Mr. Parker disappeared." Tony stood by the door, ready to leave. "I'll call you later and we can talk more," he said. After the door closed, I looked at the TV on the dresser. I knew there would not be a VCR, but I checked anyway. I called the front desk to ask if I could rent one. The person who answered said they had VCRs and would send one to my room. I was surprised when the VCR arrived just 5 minutes later. I didn't expect this kind of service at this hotel. It took me a little time to plug in the VCR. I loaded the videotape into the player and waited a moment before hitting the play button. I felt nervous about what I might see. I was almost ready to press play when I remembered something from the hospital. I recalled waking up and hearing Nikki talking to a man by the door. She called him John. Could it be Parker? I thought for a moment and remembered their conversation. Nikki said, "John, you shouldn't be here." "Does he remember what happened?" she replied. "I'm not sure. Detective Trenchard tried to ask him yesterday, but Eric was too out of it to answer. I want to know what he'll tell the police as soon as he can talk. John, please leave before he wakes up and sees you. Detective Trenchard could come back at any moment." John said, "Okay, I'm leaving. But remember what I said. Please leave now," Nikki said. "I just can't stay with you at the moment." "She kept it in my hospital room," I said out loud. I needed to tell Tony about this. I took a deep breath and pressed play. The TV screen was snowy for a moment. Then the picture changed a few times and finally settled. I saw Nikki and Jim sitting at a table looking at the camera. The room was painted gray, and the table was the same color. Nikki was wearing the same clothes from a week ago when she left home with Jim. I figured the video was from that night. Jim was speaking softly to Nikki, who had her hands on the table, palms down, staring straight ahead with no expression. After a minute, the door on the left opened, and a man came in wearing gray pants and a white shirt with no tie. "Good evening, Mrs. Anderson. I'm Detective Harris, and I will be leading this interview. Before we start, would you like some water, or do you need a bathroom break?" he asked. "No, I don't need anything right now," Nikki replied in a quiet, flat voice. "Great, then let's get started," said Detective Harris. It seemed to me that the camera was hidden behind a two-way mirror. I thought this because no one was paying attention to the camera. If it had been in the room, I believed Nikki and Jim would have noticed it. "Mrs. Anderson, let's begin with what happened at your home on Friday, August 8th. If you answer the questions honestly and in detail, I think we can solve this quickly," Detective Harris said. Nikki nodded, and he asked, "Were you at home when your husband was shot?" Nikki lowered her head. "Yes." "Who shot your husband?" Detective Harris pressed. "It was an accident," Nikki replied. "Mrs. Anderson, who shot your husband?" he asked again. "John Parker," Nikki whispered. "Who's John Parker?" "He's the gym teacher at my school." "Where were you when your husband was shot?" "I was hiding in the closet." "If you were hiding in the closet, how do you know it was an accident?" Detective Harris asked. "John told me what happened," Nikki answered. "Okay, Mrs. Anderson, please tell me what happened that afternoon." "John and I were upstairs in my bedroom when we heard the front door open," Nikki began. "I knew Eric wouldn't be home because I was supposed to pick him up at the airport that evening, so I panicked. I tried to call 911, but John told me to be quiet. He went to the top of the stairs and looked down. A few seconds later, he returned to the bedroom and whispered that someone was downstairs, then told me to hide in the closet until he came for me." "How long were you in the closet?" "I don't know. Maybe 1 or 2 minutes," Nikki said. "And then what happened?" "I heard gunshots. I got really scared. I thought someone had shot John and I was sure they'd find me too," she said with a shaking voice. I was sitting on the closet floor trying to listen for any sound that would tell me what was happening next. Then the closet door opened, and there stood John. His face looked pale. I asked him what happened as I got up from the floor. He started to mumble, "It was an accident. It was an accident." I followed him to the bedroom door, and he said, "I thought I saw a gun in his hand." I panicked and shot him. I didn't really understand what he meant until I looked down the stairs and saw Eric lying there. I rushed down the stairs and yelled for John to call 911, but he was right behind me and said it was too late. He said if Eric wasn't dead already, he would be before help arrived. By that time, I was sitting at the bottom of the stairs trying to see if Eric was breathing. While I was doing that, John said, "We've got to make it look like a robbery." That was when I noticed Eric was still breathing. I told John I was going to call 911. John grabbed my hand and told me to wait a bit while he tried to make it look like a burglary, and then went into the family room. I could hear him tossing things around in the room. I knew I couldn't wait any longer, so I called 911. I was put on hold right away. While I waited for the operator, John came back and asked what I was doing. I told him I was calling 911. He took my face in his hands, pulled it close to his, and said, "When the police arrive, tell them you came home and found Eric lying there and don't say anything else." I asked him why, and he said the police wouldn't believe it was an accident. They would think we did it on purpose. I was so scared and confused that when the 911 operator finally answered, I told her I came home for lunch and found Eric on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, and it looked like he had been shot. "What was Mr. Parker doing while you were on the phone?" Detective Harris asked. He stood and watched me until I was done talking, and then he said, "Remember to stick to the story. If you don't and the police come after me, you'll go down with me." "What did Mr. Parker do after he warned you?" "John did something strange. He bent over to Eric and I thought he was checking if he was alive. Then he whispered something in Eric's ear and left." "Did he say something to your husband? Did you hear what he said?" Detective Harris asked. "I'm not sure, but part of it sounded like, 'It's for Sarah, but I can't be certain.' I barely heard it." "What do you think it meant?" Detective Harris asked. "I have no idea," I said. "Who do you think Sarah is?" Detective Harris asked. "I'm not sure. He might have been talking about the girl Eric dated in college before we met Sarah Bowden. And why do you think he was mentioning Sarah Bowden?" "John once asked me if Eric knew Sarah Bowden. I saw Detective Harris write Sarah Bowden's name in his notebook and underline it." "We'll get back to her later," he said. "Right now, I'd like to know about your relationship with John Parker." "What do you mean by my relationship with John Parker?" Nikki replied, sounding defensive. "Exactly that," the detective replied. "What is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Parker?" "John is my boss. He's a teacher at my middle school." "Is that your only relationship with him?" Detective Harris asked. Nikki stiffened, and I noticed Jim placed his hand over hers to comfort her. "What are you trying to say?" Nikki demanded. "I was just wondering why Mr. Parker was in your bedroom," he said. "Could you explain that?" "He followed me up the stairs," Nikki answered. "Why was Mr. Parker at your house?" Detective Harris asked. "He came with me this afternoon," she replied. "So you had lunch together?" "Yes, with several other teachers." "I need the names of those teachers who had lunch with you that day," said Detective Harris. "Why did you and Mr. Parker go to your house?" "I spilled tomato sauce on my blouse, so I went home to change," Nikki explained. "Who was driving?" the detective asked. "I was driving." "Did Mr. Parker ride with you?" "Yes." "When you got to your house, did you both go inside and then Mr. Parker came upstairs to see you change?" asked Detective Harris. "He didn't follow me up the stairs." "You just said he followed you upstairs," Detective Harris pointed out. "When we got home, John went to the family room and I went upstairs to change," she clarified. "But then he came upstairs." "Why?" "He was carrying the beer mug he bought for me in Germany," Nikki said. I couldn't believe what I heard. Parker had bought that mug for her, and then she gave it to me like it was something special. Anger bubbled up inside me. "Why did he bring a beer mug upstairs?" Detective Harris asked. "He wanted to remind me of our time in Germany," Nikki explained. "Why do you think he went upstairs with the mug instead of waiting for you to come down?" Tears rolled down Nikki's cheeks as she replied, "I guess he wanted to be close to me." I felt a chill run down my spine when Nikki said that Parker had followed her upstairs. I felt like I was about to explode. "So, would you say your relationship with Mr. Parker is intimate?" Detective Harris asked. "No, I did not have any intimate moments with him." "Was that because your husband came home and interrupted?" "No." Detective Harris seemed more intense now. He was ready to push harder for answers. Part of me hoped he would get more information from Nikki, but another part of me wanted him to be kinder with her. I didn't want to go down this road with John. Nikki was feeling very upset and was struggling to keep her cool. Jim kept whispering to her, trying to help her feel better. "You said Mr. Parker went upstairs with you, but now you're saying you weren't going to do anything with him. Can you explain, Mrs. Anderson?" Detective Harris asked. "He came up with that beer mug and tried to talk me into it, but I wasn't interested," Nikki replied. "He tried to talk you into it." "You mean he tried to persuade you?" Harris asked. "Yeah, I guess so," Nikki said. "Did he have any reason to think you would agree?" asked Detective Harris. "He kept bringing up what happened in Germany and how we should—" Just then, the hotel room started to shake. In less than 2 seconds, I realized we were experiencing an earthquake. I quickly moved back to the bathroom doorway to stay safe. It felt like a strong quake, maybe a 6 on the scale. The big window in the room cracked, then burst out of its frame and fell into the parking lot below. A moment later, The lights went out. The whole thing lasted about 30 seconds, but I could hear sirens all around the city and car alarms going off in Los Angeles County. I sat on my bed and waited for the power to come back, but it never did. After about an hour, as it started to get dark, I unplugged the VCR and took it to the front desk. I wanted to ask if I could take the VCR home and bring it back the next day because my tape was stuck inside. When I reached the hotel lobby, I noticed there was some light on. I asked the desk clerk about it, and he said they had an emergency generator. I asked about taking my VCR with me, but he said that wasn't allowed. He then suggested I plug the VCR into one of the outlets that were powered by the generator so I could get my tape out. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in my Honda with the tape, driving toward my house. I hoped I would have power when I got there. I called Tony to let him know where I was going and why. He said he needed to talk to me and would meet me at my house in about half an hour. When I arrived home, it was very dark outside. There was no moon that night, and the city had lost power, so the streetlights were off. I could barely see my house from the driveway. After I turned off my car lights, I grabbed the videotape from the front seat and walked to the front door. It was so dark that I kept stepping off the edge of the sidewalk, nearly twisting my ankle a couple of times. When I reached the front door, I had to kneel down to find the keyhole. It was so dark that I thought it might be easier to feel for the key. I closed my eyes and tried it, and it worked. When I opened the door and stepped inside, I found it was even darker. I raised my hand in front of my face, but I couldn't see it at all. I remembered there was a strong flashlight in the kitchen pantry. I just needed to walk across the foyer and down the hallway to reach the kitchen, which was about 15 feet away. After that, I would need to turn right and walk another 6 feet to the pantry door. Usually I could cover that distance in 5 or 6 seconds. But in the darkness, I moved very slowly. As a child, I was never scared of the dark, but this night felt different. The darkness was deeper than anything I had ever faced. After about 30 seconds of shuffling my feet and resting my shoulder against the wall, I finally got to the kitchen door. I wasn't sure why I stopped there, but I felt a strange sensation that caused the hair on my neck and arms to stand up. It took me a moment to understand what was making me feel so scared. There was a strong smell coming from the kitchen. As soon as I stood in the doorway, I recognized the sour scent of body odor mixed with something else. For a fleeting moment, I thought it might be me, but then I realized it was the smell of whiskey. Someone else was in the house. But who could it be? Perhaps someone had used the power outage as a chance to break in. But what if it was something even worse? I thought of all the possibilities and didn't like the randomness of it all. It wasn't the marauder. It was Parker. I froze, listening for any sound that could help me find him. He might have been right in front of me or even behind me. I wished Parker couldn't see well in the dark just like me, and hoped the lights would stay out until I could find a way to escape without bumping into him. After considering my options, I thought my best bet was to get to the pantry. If I could grab the flashlight, I could use it to blind Parker temporarily and as a way to protect myself. I was sure he had a gun. He wouldn't have come in otherwise, but I didn't understand why he would take that chance to come after me. I let out a slow breath, then inhaled quietly to avoid making noise. With my back against the wall, I stepped into the kitchen and moved sideways toward the pantry door. I stopped at each step to listen. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel that he was there. After what felt like a long time, I reached the pantry door. Now, I had to step away from the wall to open it. Fear started to build inside me. I had been taking soft breaths to stay quiet, but now it felt like I couldn't get enough air. I wanted to breathe deeply, but I couldn't. This made my fear even stronger. I felt a strong urge to scream and run, but I held still. After hesitating for a moment, I stretched my right leg forward about a foot and then followed with my left. I was about to start again when I noticed him. We weren't touching, but I could feel the warmth coming from him. I didn't know what to do. Did Parker know how close I was? I could sense his breath, and his smell was so strong that it made my eyes sting. I thought about quickly stepping back or rushing at him, hoping I could make it out of the house in time to think clearly. Suddenly, I felt his hand brush against my face. "Hey, Eric," Parker said in a voice that sent chills down my spine. I realized he must have touched me to figure out where I was, so he could take a swing at me. I quickly pushed him away as hard as I could and moved to the right. I must have surprised him because he stepped back just as a flash went off. The sound was so loud, but the shot missed me. I hurried to the pantry door and opened it. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. While I was in there, Parker fired 2 more shots looking for a light. I spotted a big flashlight on the top shelf of the pantry and grabbed it. Then I squeezed into a corner, hoping that if Parker opened the pantry door, I would be out of his sight. I pressed my back against the wall and kept my left hand on the edge of the door to stay steady. If Parker found the door and opened it, I planned to use the flashlight to try and hit him. It was quiet for a moment. Then Parker spoke again. "Eric, why are you making this so hard? I've been waiting for this night for a long time. Why don't you just give up?" he said. I thought about calling to him and asking what was wrong, but I sensed he didn't want a conversation. He wanted to hurt me. "Come on, Eric. 1 shot and it'll be over. Then I'll be with Nicole and we'll celebrate," he said. I understood what Parker was doing. He wanted to make me so angry that I would say something to give away my hiding place. It worked. I could feel my anger growing. Then I noticed the pantry door move. It hadn't fully opened, just leaned a bit. "So, Eric, where are you?" he sang out. "I bet you didn't know that Nicole came to my hotel room last year in Germany. She wanted to spend time with me. I liked her so much I bought her a nice beer glass the next day." His words hit me hard. The only good thing was that it was clear he was leaning against the pantry door. "You know, before you were supposed to come home from Dallas, Nicole asked me to take you out so we could be together," he said. "I had planned to do it when she picked you up at the airport, but you came home early. Oh well. Sometimes even the best plans don't work out. I guess Nicole and I will need to leave the country tonight after I take care of you." My anger took over. I took a deep breath and then slammed the door open. The door flew open, pushing Parker forward, and I rushed in from behind. We crashed against the dining room table, and Parker lost his balance, falling into a chair with me on his back. We hit the floor hard. I thought I heard something slide across the floor, but it was too dark to see clearly. I knew I had to stop Parker. I didn't realize how strong he was until I was on top of him. He seemed dazed from the fall, so I had a chance to gain control. I switched the flashlight to my left hand and slipped my other hand under his right arm, pressing my palm against the back of his head. This held his right arm still, but I had forgotten that he was left-handed. As I leaned to my left, holding his right arm tight, he hit me hard in the side with his left elbow. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. I knew if I lost consciousness, I wouldn't wake up again. While I waited for my head to clear, I felt him tense up, ready to strike me again. I picked up the flashlight and swung it down hard, hoping to hit his arm. There was a loud crack, and Parker yelled as the flashlight made contact. I didn't know how much damage I could cause, so I lifted it and brought it down again with force. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled away. Parker let out another scream and then was quiet. I could feel his breathing change, rapid and steady. I wondered if I had knocked him out. Then he spoke. "You will pay for this, Eric," he said. Anger bubbled up inside me, but it also made me weak. Things started to come into focus. I knew if I didn't stay calm, I wouldn't be ready for Parker's next move. While Parker seemed to be taking a break to catch his breath, I unbuckled my cell phone from my belt and opened it. The screen lit up, showing Parker lying on the floor, looking to the right. His left arm was on the ground, and I couldn't tell if it was hurt or if he was just waiting for a good moment to attack again. I quickly found Tony's number and pressed speed dial. Tony answered on the 3rd ring. "Tony, Parker is here with me. Get here fast," I said without waiting for him to respond. "Help won't arrive in time to save her," Parker said. "Tomorrow, Nicole and I will be on the beach in Rio, sipping drinks and laughing about how weak you are. I'm going to make you cry before you die so I can tell Nicole what a child you were." In that moment, a realization struck me. I understood what he was trying to do and thought about turning the tables on him. It was risky, but I had to try. I leaned close to his ear and said, "You know, John, Sarah told me she didn't want to be with you because she heard you weren't good enough. She said she doesn't like weak people, and that's why she prefers me." That hit a nerve. "Shut up about Sarah," he snapped. In the dim light from my phone, I could see Parker getting really angry, almost shaking with rage. Suddenly, I wondered if my strategy had been wise. Everything went quiet for a moment, then my phone screen went dark and the lights went out, leaving us in total blackness. That's when Parker made his move. He dropped to his knees, and I was trying to keep hold of him. Somehow he got back up and spun around. I lost my grip and was thrown across the room. I knew I should try to escape, but in the dark I had no idea where I was or which way to go. I sat on the floor and stayed as quiet as I could. I listened carefully for any sign of Parker. After a few moments, I heard him. It sounded like he was moving around on the floor, searching for his gun. I slowly started to slide my hand across the floor, trying to figure out where I was. I kept going until I felt the wall behind me, sliding my hand along it to get my bearings. I found the doorstop for the pantry. Now I knew my location, but when I touched it, the spring-loaded stop popped out sharply, making a loud noise. I realized I had made a mistake. That noise would give away my position, and Parker would know where I was before I could react. There was a flash and a bang as Parker fired a shot in my direction. The bullet struck just above my head, and I felt bits of drywall fall on me. He must have thought I was standing, but the flash from the shot would have shown him I was sitting on the floor. I worried the next shot would hit me for sure. My ears were ringing from the first shot, making it hard for me to hear other sounds. I thought I heard someone yelling, probably Parker yelling at me again. A moment later, a bright light revealed Parker. I could now see him sitting on the floor just 7 feet away, raising his gun and aiming it at me. I heard another scream, then 3 shots fired. Parker lay on his back, starting to understand what had just happened. I turned my head and was blinded by 3 bright flashlights. A police officer stepped forward and quickly moved to Parker. He threw Parker's gun away and checked his neck for a pulse. "He's still alive, sir," the officer said. Then another officer began talking into a radio. I was still confused when Tony Trinkus knelt down next to me. "Are you okay, Eric?" he asked. "Do you have any injuries?" "No, he missed," I replied. "But I don't think he'd miss next time. Thanks for saving me. Which one of you shot him?" "All of us," Tony said. By the time the ambulance took Parker away, I had already told 3 different detectives the story of what happened. Each one told me how lucky I was, as if I didn't already know that. After most of the officers left, Tony and I sat down in the family room to talk. "I don't understand why he suddenly wanted to hurt me," I said. "It was an obsession. He thought you took something from him and wanted payback," Tony explained. "It wasn't about Nikki, was it?" I asked. "No, he used her to get to you," Tony replied. "Sarah Bowden?" "Yes, her name came up a few times during your wife's questioning. I found her. Now she's Mrs. Cooper. She's married and lives in Phoenix. I talked to her on the phone just before I got here." "What did you learn?" I asked. "I asked Mrs. Cooper if she knew you. She said yes and told me the same story you did about how you met. You went on 3 dates and both felt it wasn't going anywhere. Then I asked her about John Parker. She was quiet at first, and I had to ask again for her to answer. She said John Parker was the guy she was with that night. She met him at the gas station. She didn't see him for months after that. Then he called her. He said he was sorry and wanted to come over to talk. She thought he was being genuine and let him come in. At first, he acted like a gentleman, but then he got angry about how she had left him that night. He told her that she belonged to him and nothing was going to change that. She said he tried to force himself on her. When she pulled away to grab her phone to call 911, Parker told her to go ahead. He said he would just tell the police they were looking into it, but she felt uncertain. She thought he might convince the police to believe him, and she'd get in trouble for making a false report. Cooper realized it would be hard to prove anything, and all she wanted was for him to leave her home. As he walked out, she mentioned that Mr. Parker said he would take care of her boyfriend, and if he saw them together, he would hurt them both. Mrs. Cooper explained that she was not seeing anyone at that time, so she thought it meant he didn't want her to date anyone. She said if she had known the threat was aimed directly at you, she would have told you. She didn't think of it because you and she had stopped seeing each other more than a month before she met Mr. Parker. Mrs. Cooper said Mr. Parker began calling her many times a week, so she eventually left school and moved to Phoenix without telling anyone where she went, and he never found her there. I asked if he had. No, there was only one person at UCLA who knew where Mrs. Cooper went, and Mr. Parker didn't know that person. I found this friend, and through him, I got in touch with Mrs. Cooper's parents, who helped me reach her. I hope Parker goes to jail for a long time. I wouldn't like to think he might be looking for me when he gets out. I said you probably won't hear from Mr. Parker again. His chances of making it through his injuries aren't good. When he left here, he seemed to be in a coma. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Not happy, but maybe relieved. Sorry, buddy, but your house is a crime scene again, Tony said. You'll need to leave everything as it is until we finish. It won't take long. Internal affairs will come by in the morning. That is standard after an officer-involved shooting. In this case, 3 officers were involved. You should have your home back by noon tomorrow. Can I stay here tonight? I asked. I don't want to find a hotel. I think that will be fine. Just don't touch anything in the kitchen until the investigation is done, Tony said. I won't touch anything. I just want to go to sleep. Did you finish watching the video? Tony asked. No, I was interrupted by the earthquake. Oh, right, you told me about that. Just please keep this to yourself. I gave you this copy, and after you watch it, get rid of it. Toss it out or rewrite it, Tony said. What's going to happen to Nikki? I asked. I don't know, said Tony. That's up to the prosecutor's office. I wasn't at your wife's interview, and I haven't seen her tape yet. I meant to watch it last week, but I didn't have the time. If she told the truth and they believe her, then maybe she won't be in trouble, Tony said. We stood up and Tony said, I have to go now. I'll let you know if I learn anything about your wife. I walked Tony to the door. Thanks, Tony. I think I owe you a drink, I said. At least 2, Tony said as he stepped outside. In the next chapter, I stood alone in my family room. I thought about what Parker had said to me. Was any of it true? I already knew Nikki mentioned that Parker had bought her a beer glass, so he must be telling the truth. Did Nikki enjoy her time with him when they were in Germany? Did he really convince her to be unfaithful to me? I found it hard to believe Nikki could do something like that, but I knew she had lied to me about buying the stone. How many other lies had she told me? I thought about watching the video until the end, but I felt too tired. I decided to watch it the next day. That night, I slept poorly. My dreams were filled with images from the last 3 weeks. Some were real, and some were just nightmares from my fears and worries. On Friday morning, I woke up to the doorbell ringing. I quickly put on my robe and went to open the door. 2 men in plain brown suits were standing outside. For a moment, I wondered if they bought their suits from the same place where Tony had bought his suit. The first time we met. The 2 men introduced themselves as detectives from Internal Affairs and said they were there to investigate the shooting. One of them asked if I or anyone else had touched anything in the kitchen after the shooting. I told him that no one had been in the kitchen since the investigators left the night before. They asked me to explain what had happened. After they finished questioning me about the shooting, I went back upstairs to take a shower while they continued their investigation in the kitchen. When I came back downstairs, the 2 detectives were ready to leave. They said they were done, and now I could clean up. After they left, I called the same cleaning company that had helped with the blood on the foyer floor, and they told me they couldn't come until afternoon on Monday. I told them that was okay and made an appointment. By 11 a.m., power was back on for most of the city, including Sherman Oaks. With the power restored, I decided to make some coffee and then finish watching Nikki's interview. I looked around the kitchen but couldn't find the videotape. I tried to remember what I did with it when I came home the night before, but I couldn't. I went outside to check the car, but it wasn't there either. Then it hit me that the detectives might have found the tape in the kitchen and taken it with them. There was no label on the tape, so unless they played it in my VCR, they wouldn't know what it was. Did I drop the tape on the floor when I pushed Parker? If the detectives found the tape, they might have thought it was important. Eventually, the tape was gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I needed to warn Tony to be careful. I didn't want him to get in trouble for giving me a copy of the tape of Nikki's interrogation. Without the tape, I felt lost. I felt very alone. I wanted Nikki to be home with me. I missed her a lot and wondered if we could ever be together again. Then I began to think about some things Parker had said. How could Nikki be involved with him? I started to realize that none of this would have happened if Nikki wasn't linked to Parker in some way. Whether she had a short fling with him while they were in Germany, or if it continued after they came back home, didn't matter. Either way, our marriage was over. I still couldn't believe Nikki wanted to hurt me. I would never accept that. My mood got worse, and I decided my coffee needed a little something extra. So I went to the pantry to grab some bourbon. As I walked to the pantry, I glanced back at the bloody spot on the floor. For a brief moment, I thought I saw Parker's face in the dark red stain. I shivered and turned away to open the pantry. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the amber liquid in the bottle. Then I said out loud for the first time, "I hope that man is dead now." My eyes caught the shelf where the flashlight had been the day before. Yes, I remembered now. I turned around to see if the flashlight was lying on the floor. It wasn't there. It must have been taken away as evidence. I spent the rest of the day thinking over everything I knew and planning what I should do about Nikki later. Tony stopped by my place to pick up 2 drinks I owed him. He told me that John Parker had been in a coma until 12:45, and then he passed away from his injuries. I poured Tony another whiskey because it was clear he needed it. He tried to act like it didn't bother him, but I could see that taking a man's life, even if it was necessary, was a heavy weight on him. We talked about how he felt about what happened. He said he didn't want to discuss it. Then he gave me some other news. "I talked to the assistant district attorney," he said. "They aren't going to press charges against your wife. She has been helpful with the investigation, and they don't think she was involved in the attempt on your life by Mr. Parker." I was glad that Nikki had gotten out of this trouble, but I still hadn't decided what to do about her. Tony told me more about his conversation with the ADA and what she said about why they weren't taking action against Nikki. As I listened to Tony, I began to feel something strange in my body. It was like I was losing weight as I sat there. Part of my mind was on what Tony was saying, and the other part was trying to figure out what to do about my marriage. By 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, I was already in the Honda driving to Nikki's parents' house. George greeted me at the door, asked how I was doing, and took me into the living room where Nikki and Marion were sitting. We talked about the news from last night. Mary said it must have been hard for me. Nikki looked upset and asked, "Why didn't you call yesterday and tell us what happened?" I felt bad and said, "I'm sorry, I should have called. But yesterday was a tough day and I didn't want to talk to anyone." I wasn't completely honest. I just wasn't ready to share everything with Nikki. Seeing Nikki's face, I asked, "Did you know that Parker died from his wounds?" Nikki lowered her head and shook it, tears filling her eyes again. George confirmed, "Yes, it was on the news last night. No one is sad about it in this house." Nikki looked at me and said, "I'm not crying for him, Eric. I'm crying for what he did to us." "I feel the same," I told her. "I don't understand how someone could act like that." Mary spoke up. "Eric, the DA's office called yesterday. They said they won't press charges against Nikki." I looked over at Nikki. "Yeah, I heard. That's good news," I replied. Nikki smiled at me but stayed quiet. "Mary, I want to thank you and George for your help and support during this hard time," I said, then turned to Nikki. "This has been tough for all of us." Nikki stood up from the couch, walked over to me and asked, "Can I go home with you?" "No, I'm not going home." Nikki looked confused and asked, "Where are you going?" I explained, "I have to take Charlie's car to his home in Las Vegas." Nikki looked puzzled but tried to stay calm. "I don't understand. Charlie lives in Sherman Oaks. Why do you have to drive his car to Las Vegas?" I took her face in my hands, looked into her eyes, and said, "I'll explain everything on the way to Las Vegas." Nikki wiped her tears and asked, "You want me to come with you?" I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Yes, I would love for you to come with me." Nikki hugged me tightly and I said to George, "I need a favor. I have people coming over on Monday to clean the kitchen. Could you stay home while they work?" "No problem. What time should I be there?" he asked. "Around noon," I replied. "If you don't mind, Nikki and I should head out." George and Mary walked us to the door, smiles on their faces. They were glad to see Nikki and me together again. Nikki said, "We need to stop by the house so I can pack some clothes." I replied, "I've already packed everything you'll need." "So you knew before you even got here that you were going to take me with you?" she asked. I smiled and said, "You're my wife, the woman I love." "Why would I go anywhere without you?" I said. Nikki reached over and kissed me softly. "You're the one I love." For the first part of our trip, Nikki was quiet. She just smiled and enjoyed the ride. When we got to the junction from I-10 to I-15, Nikki finally spoke up. "Did you pack my clothes? What did you bring?" she asked. "I packed your underwear," I replied, "and I also brought your black sandals and shoes to match your dress, along with all your makeup. Is there anything else you need?" "You'll have to buy that," I said with a grin. Nikki kissed me on the cheek, and we started chatting about different things like we always do. After a while, Nikki leaned back in her seat, looking relaxed. But I noticed her mood shift. She seemed to grow quiet, so I asked, "What's wrong?" "Eric, I'm really sorry about what happened before. I need to tell you everything so you understand that I love you and there was nothing between John and me. I'm just scared you might not trust me anymore, and that could hurt our marriage. You can ask me anything. I promise to be honest," she said earnestly. I paused for a moment. "I have one important question that I need to know the truth about," I said. Nikki turned to me. "Whatever you ask, I promise I will tell you the truth," she replied. "Okay, Nikki. Were you the one who broke the beer glass?" I asked. She started shaking her head even before I finished. "No, wait, what? Yes, I did. I broke it," she admitted. I hadn't expected that answer. "Do you want to know why I broke it?" Nikki asked. "No, I already know," I said. Nikki looked at me a little confused. "Eric, I love you and trust you completely. I know what I need to move forward, so I don't think we need to talk about this anymore, at least until we get home next week. I just want to enjoy these days together," I said as I took her hand. Nikki smiled. When we arrived at Charlie's house, I quickly scanned the place for any signs that Parker had been there. I found nothing. I began to wonder if he even saw me leave that night. He knew my face and could recognize me if we crossed paths. As we stepped inside, Nikki looked around and said, "This is much better than staying in a hotel on the Strip." I headed to the refrigerator and grabbed 2 cold Heineken beers. Nikki was in the master bedroom, looking out at the pool when I brought her one. We spent the rest of the day relaxing by the pool. In the evening, Nikki cooked dinner using the groceries I had bought last weekend. It was just spaghetti with sauce and a bottle of red wine. But we had a nice dinner together. Now, I think many of you are wondering how I learned to trust Nikki again. Did I ignore all the bad thoughts? No, I didn't. Let me explain. After the investigators left our house on Friday, I decided to add something stronger to my coffee. When I went to the pantry for the bourbon, I glanced at the shelf where the flashlight should have been. It was gone. Instead, I found a videotape of Nikki being interviewed at the police station. So, with my bourbon and coffee, I watched the tape. When I put the tape in the VCR and pressed play, it started right after the last part I remembered. I rewound it a bit and hit play again. Detective Harris asked, "Was he trying to persuade you? You mean he was trying to get close to you?" Nikki replied, "Yes, I guess so. Did he really think I would agree to be with him?" Detective Harris asked if Nikki could explain what happened in Germany. Nikki paused for a moment and then shared, "We went to Germany as guides for a German club. The club members were invited by a school in Munich. Our students stayed with families from the host school. The 7 guides stayed at a local hotel. On our last day, we went shopping for souvenirs. I looked in the window of a store that sold many collectibles. I first noticed the Hummels. I wanted to start collecting them, but they're very expensive. Next to the Hummels, I saw a German beer mug. As soon as I saw it, I knew Eric would love it." Detective Harris asked, "Why did your husband like that mug?" I explained, "Eric has a small collection of beer mugs and glasses, but nothing as beautiful as the one I saw." I looked at the price tag on the mug and realized it would cost over $100 in dollars. Just then, John came over and asked what I was looking at. I told him I liked the beer mug, but it was too expensive. After that, we gathered the students and drove them back to school where their hosts picked them up. In the evening, the guides were invited to dinner by some teachers from the host school. As I was getting ready to leave, John came into my room. He said he had a gift for me and handed me a box. Inside was the beer mug I had admired for a long time. I told John I couldn't take such an expensive gift, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He said it was his way of thanking me for helping him adjust to our school. I felt that I shouldn't accept it, but I also wanted to because I knew Eric would like it. So I thanked John, and we headed to meet the other chaperones in the hotel lobby. We had dinner at a nearby restaurant, and then our host took us to a lively beer hall. There, an orchestra played music, and our host taught us some German folk dances. We had a lot of fun, and I ended up drinking too much. By the time we returned to the hotel, I felt pretty cheerful. John held my hand as we walked, and I thought he was just making sure I didn't trip on the uneven sidewalk. When we reached the hotel, John walked me to my room. As I opened the door, he pulled me closer and kissed me. I was taken by surprise and couldn't respond right away. He kissed me again, and for a moment I kissed him back. But then I realized what was happening and stepped back. I told him that what he did was wrong, and I should not have let him kiss me again. He said he wanted me and thought I wanted him too. I told him he was mistaken, pushed him out into the hallway, and closed the door. That was the end of it. "Did Mr. Parker leave you alone after that?" Detective Harris asked. "Mostly. The next day, John said sorry for his actions and blamed it on the drinking the night before. After that, he behaved well. So you didn't get involved with Mr. Parker?" "No. I love my husband, and I have never cheated on him, and I never will." "When you got home, what did your husband say about the beer mug Mr. Parker gave you?" "I didn't tell Eric the truth. I said I bought it for him. I felt happy when I saw how much Eric liked the mug. But then I realized I had just lied to him for the first time in our marriage, and I started to cry. I almost told him the truth then, and now I wish I hadn't." "After the trip, did Mr. Parker try to convince you to go out with him or suggest anything inappropriate?" Detective Harris asked. "He occasionally flirted with me, but it wasn't too serious." "What do you mean by not too serious?" "Well, the flirting was wrong, but not offensive. He never asked me to go out with him or anything like that until the day of the incident." "Why do you call it an incident?" "John wouldn't have shot Eric on purpose. He shot Eric by mistake." "Mrs. Anderson, the shooting wasn't a mistake. Mr. Parker knew your husband. He had time to see him on the stairs before he shot him." "It can't be true that Mr. Parker didn't notice your husband was carrying bags and didn't have a gun. No, that can't be. He wouldn't have done that on purpose." "Nikki!" she cried. "Did you hear the gunshots when you were hiding in the closet, Anderson?" Detective Harris asked. "Yes," Nikki replied. "The first shot was really loud, but the next two shots a few seconds later weren't as loud." "Do you know why there was a pause between the first shot and the next two?" Detective Harris continued. "No, I never thought about it," Nikki said. "Mr. Parker was at the top of the stairs until your husband came down and faced him," Detective Harris explained. "Then, Mr. Parker shot your husband in the chest. Mr. Anderson fell down the stairs onto his luggage. Mr. Parker came down and shot him 2 more times in the stomach. It was clear that Mr. Parker wanted your husband dead." Nikki lowered her head onto the table and cried. Jim pulled her close to comfort her and said something to help calm her down. Then he asked if someone could bring Nikki a glass of water. Detective Harris gave her a moment to recover while they waited. "Mrs. Anderson, can you tell me why Mr. Parker might have wanted to kill your husband?" Detective Harris asked. Nikki shook her head. "I can't believe he would do such a thing. I don't know why." "Is there anything else you can think of that might help us?" Detective Harris pressed. "Only that it might involve Sarah Bowden," Nikki said. "Why do you think it has to do with Miss Bowden?" Detective Harris asked. "I'm not sure. When we were in Germany, John told me to ask Eric if he remembered Sarah Bowden but didn't explain why," Nikki replied. "Did you ask your husband about Sarah Bowden?" Detective Harris continued. "Yes. He said he had met her a few times in college," Nikki answered. "Did you believe your husband?" Detective Harris asked. "Yes." "Did you tell your husband that Mr. Parker wanted to know?" Detective Harris inquired. "No. I don't know why," Nikki said. "Did you see Mr. Parker after the shooting?" Detective Harris asked. "Yes, at school. He came to the hospital once, too." "He was at the hospital? Why?" Detective Harris asked. "He said he needed to talk to me and wanted to see how Eric was doing," Nikki replied. "What did he want to discuss?" Detective Harris asked. "He wanted to make sure I wouldn't tell anyone what really happened," Nikki said. "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I think we're done for today," Detective Harris said. "We might want to talk to you again, so please check in with us before leaving town." Detective Harris stepped away from the desk and went to the phone on the wall. He picked up the receiver and spoke to someone, but Nikki couldn't hear the conversation. After hanging up, Detective Harris turned to Jim. "Mr. Culkin, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. Jim and Detective Harris huddled together in the corner for a bit, and then Jim led Nikki out of the room. The screen went black and then filled with static. After watching the video, I noticed some things were better, but I still wondered if Nikki was being honest. I wasn't sure what to think about her. That night, Tony came over for a drink. He told me that the DA's office decided not to charge Nikki with anything. When I asked him why, Tony said the assistant district attorney was sure Nikki told the truth. I wondered how they could be so sure she hadn't lied. Detective Harris had asked our friend Jim if Nikki would be willing to take a lie detector test. Jim said he would talk to her about it. The next day, Jim called Detective Harris and told him Nikki agreed to the test. During the test, they asked her questions to check if her answers were honest. They asked the same questions in different ways to make sure her answers matched. Nikki promised that she had answered truthfully, and the test showed that she did not lie at any point in her earlier interview. I believed she was smart enough not to cheat the test, so I felt relieved to learn the truth. Nikki wasn't having any kind of relationship with John Parker, and she was not interested in him at all. Parker gave her a beer mug to try to win her over, but Nikki quickly ended any chance of that. Even though she drank a lot, she didn't want anything to do with him. In fact, the beer mug was the only item damaged when Parker tried to make it seem like our house had been broken into. I was curious about what happened. Nikki said Parker brought the mug upstairs to remind her it was a gift from him. He then tried to convince her to be closer to him based on some misunderstanding of a past event in Germany. He seemed to think that because she allowed him to kiss her, she might want more. That afternoon, I walked into the house and interrupted his plans. I began to worry that Nikki thought accepting the mug somehow led to the problems we faced. I thought she might have broken the mug herself because she didn't want it to remind her of the situation, and she blamed herself. I really needed to ask Nikki one important question. If she broke the mug, things would be okay. But if Parker broke it, I would have more questions and doubts. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.